Ezekiel 33:3.
Today, we're going to take a look at the topic of what does the Bible teach about Easter? It's a pretty woven tradition into the church, and we're going to look at verses that talk about Easter. We're going to see where exactly the word shows up in the Bible, and we're also going to take a look at some pieces outside of the Bible as well. And we'll also look at a lot of symbols, because in order to understand Easter, you have to know a little bit about astronomy, and you'll see why. So where is Easter mentioned in the Bible? If you do a search on a site like Bible Gateway, you'll find that there's one result for Easter. The one result shows up in one verse, and that one verse happens to be the book of Acts, chapter 12, verse 4. So Easter is mentioned in Acts 12, verse 4. End of story, right? We can all celebrate Easter. We can all be happy about it. Or is something wrong? Let's take a look at the book of Acts, chapter 12, and let's read it. And let's actually see what the context is here. Because if it's only mentioned once in the Bible, how do we even know what to do? How do we know what the customs and traditions are? When we look back in the book of Exodus, Exodus 12 is very thorough. It tells you exactly what to do for the Passover. It tells you what to do for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So why such little detail for Easter? If we take a look at Acts chapter 12, it says, "Now about the time Herod the king stretched forth his hand to vex certain of the church, and he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And because he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to take Peter also. Then were the days of unleavened bread. And when he apprehended him, he put him in prison, and delivered him to the 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people." So this is the one place in the entire Bible you will see this word Easter. There is no other detail about it. You can search all the way you want. So let's take a look here. We can see that in Acts 12, verse 3, it says, "And because he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter also. Then were the days of unleavened bread." So we can see that the days of unleavened bread are falling right before Easter. And then it says, "And when he had apprehended him, he put him in prison, and delivered him to 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people." So we see that we have first the days of unleavened bread, and this is in the same time period. It's not like verse 4 is like a year later. This is the same time period, because what we're talking about here is we see, "And because he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter also." They're taking Peter, they're capturing him, and in verse 4, they're putting him in prison. This is the same period of time. So we can see that Easter is falling right in line with the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So let's figure out this first. Who wrote the book of Acts? St. Luke the Evangelist. It says the Acts of the Apostles, an abbreviation Acts, is the 5th book of the New Testament, a valuable history of early Christian church. Acts was written in Greek, presumably by St. Luke the Evangelist. The Gospel according to Luke concludes where Acts begins, namely with Christ's ascension into heaven. So that's the Encyclopedia Britannica, and we're going to check to see if that's even accurate. So we can see that Luke, we got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The book of Luke ends where Acts begins. That's really important. So let's take a look at Acts 1 to 6. So the very beginning of the book of Acts, because we want to see, does it actually connect to the book of Luke? "So when they had come together, they asked him, 'Lord, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel?' And he said to them, 'It is not for you to know times or seasons that the Father has fixed by his own authority. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you. And you will be my witness in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the end of the earth.' And when he had said these things, as they were looking on, he was lifted up, and a cloud took him out of their sight. And while they were gazing into heaven as he went, behold, 2 men stood by them in white robes, and said, 'Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking into heaven? This Jesus who was taken up from you into heaven will come the same way as you saw him go into heaven.'" So here, this is the ascension of Christ. He spent 40 days on earth after he was crucified to prove that he was alive. And then he ascended. So in the book of Acts, we can see, yes, in fact, we see that Luke does leave where Acts picks up, because Acts is covering his ascension and then the Acts of the apostles. What did the apostles do when Christ left? They went around the world and started to spread a message. Acts 2, 1-4. When the day of Pentecost arrived, they were gathered together in one place. So this is the next chapter. So Christ is pulled away. He goes up into heaven, and he said before he left, he said, "It is not for you to know the times of the seasons that the Father has fixed by his own authority, but you will receive the power of the Holy Spirit." Well, this happens in the very next chapter during Pentecost, which is also Shavuot. When the date of Pentecost arrived, they were all together in one place, and suddenly there came from heaven a sound like a mighty rushing wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting. And divided tongues as of fire appeared to them and rested on each one of them. And they were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterance. So let's take a look. What's going on here? We see during the Passover, Christ died. He died during the Passover. The Last Supper, Christ had the Passover meal. That was the Last Supper. Then we have the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which starts with the Passover. The first day of Passover, we have the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So that means that Christ was resurrected during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That's where we are right now. We're actually wrapping up the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It ends this evening, this evening, tomorrow evening. So you have the last feast, which is going to be the Feast of Fruits, which just happens to fall this Sunday. And then tomorrow evening at sunset, that's the end of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So we have Christ dying during the Passover, which is the beginning of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and then being resurrected 3 days later during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And then in Acts chapter 2, we can see that we have Pentecost. And this is obviously happening within this period of time here, because we're looking at Pentecost, where chapter 2 in Acts, the Holy Spirit rains down on them. So what I'm trying to point out here is Easter, we don't really have an explanation for it. If Easter was supposed to be on here somewhere, it should have shown up with the Feast of First Fruits, or maybe if it was a little bit later in time, the Feast of Weeks, the Pentecost. But we don't have Easter on our major holidays. In the Old Testament, God gave us all the holidays. God gave us the Passover, Feast of Unleavened Bread, Feast of First Fruits, Feast of Weeks, Feast of Trumpets, Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, and Feast of Tabernacles, Feast of Booths, also called Sukkot. These were 7 holy days that God specifically gave us. The Lord gave us these himself. The 2 minor holy days, well, these were ones that the Israelites, the Jews, had come up with. So Feast of Dedication, Hanukkah, yeah, that was their own celebration that they came up with. And if you read the book of Maccabees, you'll have more understanding of Hanukkah. And then the Feast of Lots or Purim, well, every Purim, we read the book of Esther. And it was a celebration for basically the Jews were about to be exterminated, and then all of a sudden they take over. And so this was a big party that they threw. But these 2 holidays weren't given by God. The 7 major holidays were. So we can see that whatever Easter is, it falls around the time of the Passover and Feast of Unleavened Bread, because when we read that chapter, we can tell it had to have happened within that week. That's when Peter was taken. So here again, we see Acts 12, verse 3. It says, "Then were the days of unleavened bread." So what were we talking about? Well, they were being taken to prison, Peter also. And then it says, "And when he had apprehended him, he put him in prison and delivered him to the 4 quaternions of soldiers, intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people." So he was taken during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So we know that either during the feast or after the feast, that's when Easter is supposed to be. But we have no account for it at all in the Old Testament. It doesn't exist. We know at least 1 year passed from the time of Christ leaving earth. How do we know that? Well, when we're taking a look here, we can see that the Feast of First Fruits, the Feast of First Fruits and the Feast of Unleavened Bread in Acts chapter 12, we've went around an entire year again. So when we're looking at Acts chapter 12 and we're comparing it with Acts chapter 1, there's 1 year in between that period of time, when Christ was with them versus when they were put in jail. So after the Feast of Unleavened Bread comes the Feast of First Fruits, or if we go a little bit farther in time, you could say Pentecost. But of course, Easter doesn't show up in either of these places because, of course, it was never defined in the Old Testament. It just suddenly appeared out of nowhere in the New Testament, Acts 12:4. There was no details about bunnies, no details about chocolate, no details about anything, really, even the way they calculate it. So we don't understand what's going on here if we go by the Bible here. but are we going to deviate from the Bible? No, there's something we haven't checked yet. Do we actually know that it says Easter? Or are we just reading the English? You know, when people read the Bible, they forget that it's written in Greek or it's written in Hebrew, depending on if it's the Old or New Testament. Did we do our due diligence and actually check to see that the word Easter says Easter, or does it say something else? So where did Easter come from? As we saw, it only appears once in the Bible in Acts chapter 12:4, and there's no explanation about any of the festivities or customs that surround it. Acts 12:4, if you take a look at different translations, you're going to notice something. It's translated as Passover. Look at the line. After arresting him, he put him in prison, handed him over to be guarded by 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. Herod intended to bring him out for the public trial after the Passover. That's New International Version. New Living Translation says Passover. English Standard Version says Passover. But if we look in the King James Version, the most trusted version for translations, we see the word Easter. The King James Version is the only Bible translation, or is one of the only Bible translations that translates Passover as Easter. All these other translations say the Passover. There's very few that you'll find, unless they're copying the King James, that say Easter. So we have a problem here with English translation. Let's check to see what exactly it says in Greek, because we already read the book of Acts, the 5th book. It was written in Greek, as were all the books of the New Testament. So here's Acts 12:4. And if we take a look, we can see, here it is, broken down. We can see the Greek words written above it. And if you notice, where it says 3957, it's like the 4th word from the end in the 2nd line. It says Pascha, Pascha, and it says Passover beneath it. Okay, so it looks like the lexicon, the Bible dictionary. The Bible dictionary doesn't translate this as Easter. The Bible dictionary translates this as Passover. But let's double check. New Testament's written in Greek. We see the word Pascha. The word Passover is Pascha in Greek. And if we take a look at Logos 9 Bible software, it says the exact same thing. These Greek letters, they mean Passover. They don't mean Easter. So where did we get that name from? Why did they change the name of Passover to Easter? There's no explanation. I mean, other parts of the Bible called it the Passover. Did King James call it the Passover just after the crucifixion, or sorry, Easter after the crucifixion, and before the crucifixion was it called Passover? What happened there? Let's look. Let's see how the King James Bible translates Matthew 26:18, because that's before the crucifixion. So let's take a look if the word Pascha is translated as Passover. Matthew 26:18, King James Version. And he said, go into the city to such a man, and say unto him, the master saith, my time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at thy house with my disciples. Now, this doesn't say Easter, it says Passover. But we have to check. Is this is English? Let's take a look at what's going on behind the words. Matthew 26:18. If we look at Matthew 26:18, we see that word 3957, Pascha, Passover. So are you telling me that the King James Version, before the cross, translates Pascha as Passover, and then after the cross it becomes Easter? Okay, well, that makes sense, I guess. And maybe it has to do with the resurrection. We don't have any explanation in the Bible, but maybe that's the logic that King James was using. Let's keep looking. We have a problem. If we look here, we can see Matthew 26:18 is before the cross, and it says Passover. And then if we look at after the cross, the King James, it translated this as Easter. So here's my question. Is there any other places in the Bible that talk about the Passover after Acts chapter 12:4? Because they should be translated as Easter as well, shouldn't they? If the logic was before the cross, it's the Passover, and after the cross, it's Easter. Sure, let's take a look at other books then of the Bible that talk about the Passover after the book of Acts, and they should say Easter if they're going to be consistent. It gets even more strange. When we look at the Passover, it's also recorded in the book of 1 Corinthians 5 and 7, and the book of Hebrews 11 and 28, both of which are after Acts chapter 12, verse 4. 1 Corinthians 5:7, and we're only looking at the King James. Purge out therefore the old leaven, that ye may be a new lump, as ye are unleavened. For even Christ our Passover is sacrificed for us. Hebrews 11:28, King James Version. Through faith, he kept the Passover and sprinkling of blood, lest that destroyed the firstborn should touch them. Remember, in Egypt, the Passover was about the firstborn being killed and then the exodus out of Egypt. Well, this fits. Why doesn't this say Easter? Why did they only translate Acts 12:4 in the King James Version as Easter, and everywhere else the King James wrote it as Passover? Was it different words? No, it was Pascha in all those verses. The King James Version is not consistent. The King James Version only translated Pascha as Easter in Acts 12:4, but everywhere else where it used the word Pascha, it translated as Easter. I'm sorry, as Passover, sorry. And that's both before and after the cross. So they just cherry picked one verse for some reason, injected a word that's nowhere else in the Bible, and then all of a sudden we built all these customs and traditions around it. This is madness. But you know what? Since the King James Version is by far the most popular translation, why do you think the churches are celebrating Easter today? The problem is we don't have a clue where they get their rituals from. The only place in the entire Bible Easter is found is Acts 12:4, specifically in the King James Bible. Here's the 1611. You can see it's written in the Old English, and this is the only place. I checked to see, did Hebrews have Easter written there? No, even the 1611 didn't have it. So there's a lack of consistency. So where are the rabbits? Where are the Easter eggs? Where are the chocolates? And where's the honey for eggs? Is that part of the Passover? Let's take a look at the Passover and see if we can find these details, because clearly we can tell Easter and the Passover, they must be the same thing. It's the same word. So what does the Bible teach us about the first Passover? Probably the best place to look, right? Find the first Passover described in the Bible. God's going to give you all the details for it. Let's see. Do we find chocolate bunnies, eggs, and all this other stuff? Exodus 12, 1-7. Now the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, this month is the beginning of months for you. It shall be the first month of your year. Tell the whole congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man must select a lamb for his family, one per household. If the household is too small for the whole lamb, they are to share with the nearest neighbor based on the number of people and apportion the lamb accordingly. Your lamb must be an unblemished year-old male. You must take it from the sheep or the goats. You must keep it until the 14th day of the month. Remember that, the 14th day of the month, when the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel will slaughter the animals at twilight. They are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and the tops of the door frames of the houses where they eat the lambs. It carries on. They are to eat the meat that night, roasted over the fire, along with the unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Do not eat any of the raw or cooked in boiling water. Do not eat any of the meat raw or cooked in boiling water, but only roasted over the fire, its head and legs and inner parts. Do not leave any of it until the morning. Before the morning, you must burn up any part that is left over. This is how you are to eat it. You must be fully dressed for travel, with your sandals on your feet and your staff in your hand. You are to eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. On that night, I will pass through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn male, both man and beast. I will execute judgment against all the gods of Egypt. I'm going to repeat that. On the night of the Passover, I will execute judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood on the houses where you are staying will distinguish them. When I see blood, I will pass over you. Listen to this. No plague will fall on you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. Notice here with the Passover, what were they avoiding? A plague. It killed the firstborn. And this day will be a memorial for you. And you are to celebrate it as a feast to the Lord, as a permanent statute for generations to come. What does any of this have to do with the Passover? The eggs, the bunny, the chocolates, the children hunting for eggs. You don't get any of that from Exodus 12. Well, you know what? The Passover was recorded in another part of the Bible. Maybe they added the chocolate and eggs there. The Bible never once called the Passover Easter or lists any of these strange traditions. And if we take a look at Numbers 9, we can read about the second Passover. Well, it must be here. Numbers 9, 1-6. In the first month of the second year after Israel had come out of Egypt, the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai. The Israelites are to observe the Passover at its appointed time. You are to observe it at the appointed time at twilight on the 14th day of this month, in accordance with its statutes and ordinances. So Moses told the Israelites to observe the Passover, and they did so in the wilderness of Sinai, and twilight on the 14th day of the first month. The Israelites did everything just as the Lord commanded Moses. But there are some men who were unclean due to a dead body, and they could not observe the Passover on that day. And they came before Moses and Aaron that same day and said to Moses, "We are unclean because of a dead body. But why should we be excluded from presenting the Lord's offering with the other Israelites at the appointed time?" It carries on and says, "Wait here until I find out what the Lord commands concerning you," Moses replied. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites, when any one of your descendants is unclean because of a dead body or is away on a journey, he may still observe the Passover to the Lord. Such people are to observe it at twilight on the 14th day of the second month. They are to eat a lamb together with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. They may not leave any of it until morning or break any of its bones. They must observe the Passover according to all its statutes." So see how important this is? The Passover was so important that if you touched an unclean body and still celebrated on the first month on the 14th day, now it's been moved to the second month. So that way, when you give your offering to the Lord, you're clean. So if you're on a journey or if you were unclean, well, then you'd have to have the Passover later, a month later. See how important the Passover is? The Lord would actually make an accommodation for the people who couldn't give an offering because of their uncleanliness. So clearly the Passover is extremely important because you don't see this happening with other holy days. Nothing changed from the first to the second Passover, but what we saw was that if someone was unclean, they could still celebrate it, but a month later, because at that point they'd be clean or they'd be off their journey. So what is the meaning of Passover? Maybe we're going to find from the meaning of Passover how it connects to Easter. Exodus 12 and 26. When your children ask you, "What does the service mean to you?" you're to reply, "It is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when he struck down the Egyptians and spared our homes." So what is the Passover/Easter supposed to be about? When the Lord passed over the homes in Egypt and struck down the Egyptians, but spared the Israelites. I'm not getting, I don't see where the rabbits come in. This is madness. Exodus 12 and 14. "This day will be a memorial for you, and you are to celebrate it as a feast to the Lord, as a permanent statute for the generations to come." Permanent statute for the generations to come. Is that timeline over? Because people should still be practicing the Passover today. As a matter of fact, in the New Testament, correct me if I'm wrong, in the book of Hebrews and Corinthians, did they not practice the Passover? Was that not after the crucifixion? So don't tell me that the law's been done away with and we don't have to do the Passover anymore, because they were practicing it after the crucifixion. This was a permanent statute. So then Easter somehow replaced the Passover. How did a permanent statute for generations to come get replaced by Easter and lose its original meaning? We just read what the meaning was. God said, "Tell your kids this." Well, this is not at all what we're telling our children. They're searching for eggs. Let's look at the Encyclopedia Britannica under the holiday Easter. And this is, if you look here, who put this together? Professor Emeritus of History and Religion of Duke University, Durham of North Carolina. The date of Easter and its controversies. Fixing the date on which the resurrection of Jesus was to be observed and celebrated triggered a major controversy in early Christianity, in which an Eastern and a Western position can be distinguished. The dispute, known as the Paschal controversies, was not definitely resolved until the 8th century. In Asia Minor, Christians observed the day of the crucifixion on the same day that the Jews celebrated the Passover offering. I'm going to repeat that. In Asia Minor, the Christians celebrated the day of the crucifixion on the same day the Jews celebrated the Passover offering. Is this not accurate? That is on the 14th day of the first full moon of spring, right? The first month. The 14th of Nisan, see the Jewish calendar. Is that not what we just read? The resurrection then was to be observed 2 days later, on the 16th of Nisan, regardless of the day of the week. In the West, the resurrection of Jesus was celebrated on the first day of the week, Sunday, when Jesus has risen from the dead. They changed it. They changed the date of the Passover and changed its name at the same time. So Asia Minor obviously lost the war, and they must have lost the war to the Western Church. Consequently, Easter was always celebrated on the first Sunday after the 14th day of the month of Nisan. Increasingly, the churches opted for the Sunday celebration, and the Quattrodecimans, or 14th day proponents, remained the minority. So, in other words, what the Bible taught became a minority, and instead, what they decided was, well, since the Jews are having their Passover, we got to do something different for the Christians. But the Bible didn't ask that, because Jew and Gentile are supposed to be the same thing. So why were the Gentiles deciding they need to have a different day for the resurrection or a different day for the Passover than what the Jews had? It should have been the same. The Council of Nicaea in 325 decreed that Easter should be observed on the first Sunday following the first full moon after the spring equinox, March 21st. We've talked about this. Easter, therefore, can fall on any Sunday between March 22nd and April 25th. So let me get this straight. The Passover can move between any Sunday between March 22nd and April 25th. Is this at all following what we just read in Exodus? No. Someone obviously went and made a change. Who made the change? Well, the Council of Nicaea. Well, that would be the church, would it not? Now, there's no Catholic church, there's no Protestant church. This would just be the church back then. So the church decided that they had the authority to change the Passover and move the date and move it onto Sunday and call it Easter. The church changed the Passover into Easter and changed the date. This is bizarre. I didn't realize they had that kind of authority. The same organization that changed the Sabbath to the Lord's Day on Sunday also changed the date of Easter. Are you seeing a pattern here? There was more than one Lord in the Old Testament. What about Baal? We just talked last week about Mastema. Mastema was Baal. That was that angel that went and basically took the Egyptians and made them chase after the Israelites. Just a second, I'll just wait till Dorothy's audio gets connected. So I'll repeat that again. The same organization that changed the Sabbath to the Lord's Day on Sunday also changed the Passover and moved the date from the 14th of the first month to all of a sudden the first Sunday after the full moon following March the 21st. This is bizarre. And of course, remember, Sunday is called the Lord's Day. But when we read the Old Testament, there's more than one Lord. Is it possible that the Lord of Sunday is Baal? Exodus 12 and 12. On that night, I will pass through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn male, both man and beast, and I will execute judgment against all the Egyptian gods. I am the Lord. So what was the Passover about? It was about striking down the Egyptians. The Israelites had done their exodus out of Egypt, and that's when we saw judgment against all the gods of Egypt. So I would suspect if we're going to teach our children about the Passover, we'd be teaching them the story where the Exodus happened on the Passover, where the angel of death passed over the Israelites and executed judgment on the Egyptians. That's what we should be teaching. But the same organization that changed Saturday to Sunday, they also moved the Passover and they called it Easter. And we already saw it's nowhere in the Bible. The King James Version took the word Pascha and in one verse translated as Easter, but in the verses both after and before, it was translated as Passover. So look at this. We just read that there was supposed to be judgment executed on Egypt. And then here we see at the very front of the church stands what? At St. Peter's Square, we have an Egyptian obelisk. So the church that changed the Passover, which was a holy day, celebrating the judgment on the Egyptian gods, has a big Egyptian obelisk where they placed the Christmas tree and also changed the Sabbath. And this is who has the authority to represent God's word. This is completely backwards. We're reading the Torah right now in our Bible studies. This is completely backwards.
Flamma seius, Lucifer matutinus inveniat. Ille in quam Lucifer qui nescit occasum, Christus filius tuus, ille in quam Lucifer, qui nescito casum, Christus filius tuus, Christus filius tuus, qui regressus ab inferis, humano generi serenus iluxit, et tecum vivit et regnat in saecula saeculorum.
I actually checked to see if this translation was accurate, because if this is being said during Easter, this tells a lot. So here, if we look, we can see at the top, Il in quam Lucifer. I can't read Latin. I don't think any of us can, but good thing we have cell phones, because what's on there? Google. Google can translate Latin. It's a dead language, but you can pop these words right into Google. Let's break it down. I only broke part of this down because I only want to see one part. This first part says, and I'm not going to even say it, you can see he, I say, O Lucifer. Okay, that's extremely close to what they translated here in the video, so this is not a fraud. So I say, O Lucifer. He, I say, O Lucifer. That's accurate. Let's look at the next line. Who will never set. Okay, so I pop these Latin words into Google. What does Google say? He knows sunset. Again, that's extremely close. But here's the one that I'm the most interested in, because this is not at all biblical. Christ is your son. Okay, we already saw that it's referring to Lucifer. What other Lucifer would be referring to if not the one in the Bible? How is Christ the son of Lucifer? Tell me the verse and tell me the chapter. Is this really the translation? You bet it is. It's perfect. So they're actually saying during Easter, when they've canceled the Passover and they've moved the date of the Passover, which means it's not the Passover anymore, is it? And then they changed the name to Easter, and then they say this hymn. Let's break it down. During the Easter Mass, the church says a hymn that he, I say, O Lucifer, he knows sunset, Christ is your son. I only need the first two blocks to see there's a horrible, horrible theological problem here. Christ is not the son of the devil. That's insane. How come no one's pointed that out? I'll tell you why. Because Italians speak Italian. They don't speak Latin. So even if they're following along, it's like they even know what they're saying. If the word Easter isn't actually in the Bible, now we got to ask that million-dollar question. Where did it come from? Look at the wheel of the year. You've seen this many times. Yule, and we talk about the Yule log. We know that's Christmas. Well, look, that's December 21st. Across from it, we see Letha. So that's the winter solstice on the top, the summer solstice on the bottom. Now let's look at the equinoxes. We have the autumn equinox, that's Mabon, and then we have Ostara, that's the spring equinox. Easter is Ostara, that's the spring equinox. I'll prove it. Why did they take this time of year called Ostara and then all of a sudden change the Passover date and make it go based off of the full moon, off of the equinox in the spring? Who or what is Ostara? Ostara is not a word in the Bible in any translation. Go check. You can go to BibleGateway.com on your cell phone, type in Ostara, you will not find it anywhere. This is Oster. When I searched to find out who Ostara was, I was redirected here. So you can see Ostara redirects here. Okay, why is that? Ostara is Oster. This is where you get Easter from. Look at this. Oster in Old English, Istra, Northumbrian dialect Estro or Estro, Mercian dialect and West Saxon dialect, Old English, Oster. Here's where you can see it. Old High German, Ostara. Easter is Ostara. And what is it? A West Germanic spring goddess. Well, I guess that makes sense, right? We're having the Easter celebrations in the spring during the equinox, and the date is being calculated based off of the moon during the equinox. If anyone was to die in my family, their date doesn't move based on the full moon. That's ridiculous. Why is the resurrection of Christ, why is the date of the Passover moving around based on the moon? Because it's not the Passover. It's the worship of Ostara. By the way of Germanic month bearing her name, and you can see here, the months were called monas. So Easter monas. So Easter monas, Old High German, Easter monath. So Easter month, Ostara month. So April was Ostara month. She is the namesake of the festival of Easter in some languages. Oster is attested solely by Bede in his 8th century work, The Reckoning of Time, where Bede states that during Oster month, the equivalent of April, pagan Anglo-Saxons held what? They had feasts. They had a feast in Oster's honor. So let me get this straight. You moved the Passover feast, which we were supposed to keep for all generations and tell our children about it, and instead you mistranslated the word Pascha as Easter, and then the church decided by the 8th century, starting in the 4th century, I think was the argument, that they had to move the date of the Passover because they didn't want to overlap with the Jews. Even though Jew and Gentile is the same, that was the message of Paul, was it not? And it carries on and says, but this tradition has died out by this time and was replaced by the Christian Paschal month, a celebration of the resurrection of Jesus. So they're admitting here that the pagan Anglo-Saxons held a feast towards Oster, and then the church came and replaced it. And they replaced it with the resurrection of Christ. Can you do that? Can you actually take a Christian day that was, God says, keep this forever and tell your children, and then switch it to a totally different date, replacing another pagan feast? Is that a thing? Here are the facts we've learned so far. And if you want to challenge them, go back and look. The church changed the date of the Passover from the 14th day of Nisan to Sunday, following the first full moon after the spring equinox. The church changed the name of the Passover to Easter and stopped celebrating the Passover, claiming it was the date of the resurrection of Christ, even though the date changes every year. During the spring equinox, the pagan religions worshipped a goddess named Ostara. They had a feast to her. The name Ostara is High German, but pronounced Oster, which is very close to Easter in Old English. The Anglo-Saxons, according to Bede, held a feast to Oster during this time of year. They were pagans. The Passover was a holy day that was a statute provided directly from God in Exodus 12. We read all of it. That was a memorial of the exodus from Egypt and the judgment of the Egyptian gods. The Vatican has a giant obelisk taken from Egypt, where it also places the Christmas tree. The Vatican priests during the Easter Mass sing a hymn in which they state that Jesus is the son of Lucifer, the devil. That's crazy. So what's going on here? Are we actually that naive? Is this the real church, or is this an imposter? What is this hand symbol? Ostara 2015. Facts and traditions of the Wiccan spring equinox celebration. Wiccans are witches. That's a modern day name. Wicca was something that was kind of built in the 1950s. I can't remember the individual's name, but it's fairly new, but it's actually based on older pagan traditions. It's like neo-paganism. It's new paganism. But Wicca has spring equinox celebrations tied to Ostara. I want to see what exactly the pagans do for the Ostara celebrations that just happen to fall at the same time as the Easter celebrations. Remember, Easter was Old English and Ostara was High German. For many neo-pagans, Ostara celebrates the spring maiden and the horned god, who represent characteristics of the new season. So two things were worshipped at Ostara, which is Easter. There was a horned god and a spring maiden. Where have we seen that before? How about the Beauty and the Beast pictures? How about the Baphomet and then the woman? Ostara, or Eostara, is an Anglo-Saxon goddess who represents, remember this, represents the dawn. As a spring goddess, she oversees the budding plants and burgeoning fertility of the earth. Question, was there a fertility goddess in the Bible? Was there a fertility god in the Bible? You bet there was. The horned god, sometimes envisioned as the god Pan, symbolizes the festive enjoyment of nature through hunting and dancing. Symbols of fertility and new life play a prominent role in many Ostara celebrations. So again, this is an Anglo-Saxon goddess that represents the dawn. We can see there was also a horned god present, so we have a god and a goddess. We've seen that before. And this is a symbol of fertility. Are you aware that during the springtime, the pagans in the Bible, what they would do is they'd have these fertility rituals. We talked about them during the Wednesday Bible studies, where they would basically have these big orgies where the king would pretend to be this sun god, and then you'd have a priestess who would be the goddess, and the two would have sex in public with everyone watching. And they thought that this kind of sympathetic magic could make sure they'd have a good harvest. So, of course, when people are living on farms in their agricultural societies, if they're superstitious and don't know who God is, perhaps they think they can somehow control the wind and the rain and the sun by invoking the energies of the sun and invoking the energies of the moon or the earth, and then playing out some kind of theatrics. This is not the resurrection of Christ at all. This is a fertility goddess that is associated to the dawn. Remember, when we looked at the pagan wheel of the year, the sun starts to look over the horizon. Remember, at Christmas time, the sun dies for 3 days and then resurrects. And then around Easter, if you look at the equinox, it's when the days are half and half. That's when the sun is starting to what? Rise above the equator, if you look at the wheel of the year. Similar to those observed at Easter, symbols for Ostara included eggs, rabbits, flowers, and seeds. Bingo, we found it. Okay, this is where the eggs came from. This is where the rabbits came from. This is where all these weird traditions came from that don't exist in the Bible. This is not the Passover. They changed the date of the Passover, hence why it changes every year. The Jews, we just did the Passover. Next year, it will still be on the 14th of the first day of the first month of the year. And the year following, it will still be that way. But Easter every year will change, and you know that. And the reason it's changing, we already read. The church was observing the spring equinox. They were looking for the first full moon, and the first Sunday after that full moon is Easter. So now that you see the eggs and the rabbits and the flowers and such are all connected to Ostara, you can't say that they haven't blended paganism with Christianity. So the question in your mind should be, in the Bible, are you allowed to do that? Can you, not keep the Passover? That was a commandment, and then replace it with something else and pretend it's the Passover, and then do stuff that had to do with a pagan goddess? I probably don't need to answer that question. It says, many neo-pagans believe these symbols represent fecundity of spring and incorporate them into rituals, altars, and celebratory feasts. Okay, so we're Christians, they're pagans. We're supposed to be separate from them because they're supposed to not know God. We're supposed to know God. They're doing these rituals because of fertility of ancient crops and cycles that kings and priestesses were following, and we Christians are following suit. The origin of Easter. This picture says Ostara, the pagan goddess of Easter. If you look behind Ostara, there's a big sun, and that's a very specific looking sun. You should recognize it. We've seen it many times before. Here's one example. This one's in the church. But if you notice, they put the name of the Lord written in Hebrew inside of the sun. Is the God of the Bible the sun? Absolutely not. There are multiple verses in Deuteronomy alone that says don't worship the sun, the moon, the stars. So why did they take the Lord's name and put it inside of the sun? I remember we talked about Genesis 4:26, mistranslation. What did it say? People started to call themselves by the name of the Lord. And it happened right after the serpent in Genesis 3. If we look over here, this is inside the church. Obviously, you can tell by the artwork, it's the same sun. It's got a dark inside and then rays extending at different lengths outside. You can tell it's the same symbol as Ostara. And then you see the letters IHS. What is that? If we look at the Jesuits, they have the same logo. It's a sun, and it says IHS, so it's the same thing. So it means in hoc signa vinces, meaning in this sign, thou shalt conquer. What sign are we talking about? The sun. Why would we conquer in the name of the sun? I thought Christ wasn't the sun. I thought we are not supposed to worship the sun, the moon, the stars. Why would we ever conquer in the name of the sun? I think you're starting to see what's going on here. If we take a look here, we can see in hoc signo vinces, and then on the right side, we see Freemasonry. Actually, we can see them both because the compass and square is on that same symbol. So are the Jesuits Freemasons? Are the Jesuits the old Knights Templar? When Jacques Desmoulins was killed on Friday the 13th and burned at the stake, did they somehow share the same ideology? Maybe is that what was going on? Let's take a look at this for a moment. I'm going to show you a quick video to show you how often you see the sun. They sneak it everywhere.
Ezekiel 33:3.
So YouTube made me remove the beginning. So here's the host of the current Oscar we were looking at. I believe this was 2014, 2015. If you look behind him, that's the symbol of the Oscars. It's a statue, but it's inside of a pyramid. Now, considering that I'm looking at a place that has symbols from Egypt, and I've got Masons that are putting Egyptian symbols on the money of the United States, I'm going to lift an eye when I start to see Egyptian stuff come out of Hollywood, regardless of who it is. So I see Oscar, has this pyramid logo. What else? Well, Oscar is actually made after the Egyptian god Ptah. It's identical. As a matter of fact, if you take a look in the encyclopedia, it will tell you that the Oscar statue is based on the Egyptian god Ptah. But if we take a look at Ptah, Ptah was actually part of a trinity. There were 3 Egyptian gods that were worshipped in Memphis. One was Osiris, one was Sokar, and the other one was Ptah. If we take the word Oscar, Oscar is an anagram for Sokar. Sokar was the 3rd god of the Egyptian trinity in Memphis. So we have Osiris, Sokar, and Ptah. That's the 3 deities, the 3 males. That's why in the Bible, you'll see the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit, they keep calling him a he. It's because of this trinity. They have taken the idea of a male, masculine spirit, which is not talking about the Spirit of God. And then what they've done is they've overlapped it in the Bible, and they've changed the pronoun. When you look at this ceremony, what do you see? Any occult symbols? Of course, they're everywhere. As a matter of fact, if you look at the floor is the dead giveaway. There are 3 suns on the floor. There were 3 suns in Egypt. They were a trinity of 3 suns. You have a sun on the left, a sun in the center where the host is sitting, and then there's a sun on the right. But it's not just a sun. It's a specific type of a sun. It is a black sun. The inside of the sun is dark. Now, of course, since they're trying to destroy morality, halfway through this, he comes out wearing next to nothing. Because, of course, Satan is always trying to push the boundaries of our mind until we accept sin as normal. In the beginning, you could never have a host. Can you imagine in the 50s or 60s or 70s, some guy coming out from the Oscars just wearing his underwear? That would have been like deplorable. It would have been taken off the air. But what they've done is progressively, they've tried to change the way we look at morals and values and how we look at sex, which is why we have all these different genders now. And so at this Oscars, what they were trying to do was just basically push the bar of sexuality, have people look at his package, whatever they're doing. But behind him, we have that symbol of the sun. All right, look right here on his shirt. See that starboard, see that circle here? There's a circle right here, and then see there's long line, shorter line, little bit shorter line, much, much longer line. That's the same symbol that you're seeing at the Oscars. And don't say, oh, that's not possible. Of course it's possible. Aleister Crowley was worshiping Egyptian gods. The Oscars is showing a symbol of Ptah, an Egyptian god. You've got Egyptian symbolism on the American money. All I can say at this point is wake up. We can see that the cross of Baphomet, or sorry, the cross of Leviathan is inside of the symbol of a black sun. And it's a black sun with short lines, long lines. It's the same sun that they're hiding in all these different images. So right here, that is the exact same sun you saw at the Oscars. That is the exact same sun in Freemasonry, the exact same sun that you can find inside the church. Let me show you the Catholic Church. It's there too. This is how it's depicted in the church. Sometimes they'll write the name Yahweh, Jehovah, inside of this. Remember, this was the name that was not given by God. This was a name that people started to apply to themselves. We saw that in Genesis 4:26. This has become a magical symbol. So this is what you're seeing. If you're watching the Super Bowl, explain to me. I want someone tell me if I'm wrong. Tell me why at the Super Bowl. Why are you seeing symbols that are coming from the Catholic Church? You have to answer that question. Otherwise, you're living in this delusion where you're just ignoring this stuff. Now they're dancing on the black sun. So before it was just in the background. Now the dance floor itself is the black sun. You saw it at the Oscars. Now you saw it at the Super Bowl. The guy in the middle is wearing the same symbol. He's wearing that symbol that they were just dancing on, and it's over top of his right shoulder. It's blue and purple and kind of tealish. Of course, since we're dealing with the goats, they give us the sign of the horns. And all of you, when you see this, you think, oh, they're just rocking it out. I'm like, no, that's the sign of the horns. They were just dancing on the sun I saw the Phoenician tau. The guy in the center is wearing the sun as well. And now he's flipping the sign of the horns. And look, of course, he's wearing his Christian cross because we know the symbol of the cross is not a Christian symbol. Beyonce, she is depicting herself right now as a character in the Bible. Do you know which one? The Queen of Heaven, Book of Jeremiah. Why are all these celebrities throwing out goat horns? Why are they throwing up suns and moons? Why are they depicting themselves as characters from the Bible, gods and goddesses that were taboo, forbidden, not to be worshipped, and none of us even notice? Here's a totally different artist. If you notice this artist, see she has the exact same costume as what you see Beyonce. And they're both pregnant. And the reason why is because the Queen of Heaven is going to give birth to something, which is why they keep making these pregnant women specifically dress up in this costume. And notice beside the pregnant woman, what do we see? Oh, I don't know, some guy in a moose costume. Yeah, the horns. You've got the sun on the right, and you've got the moon on the left. You've got the horns. And that thing she's wearing on her head is the same symbol as Beyonce, which is the same symbol that we were seeing when we were looking at all these individuals dancing. It's this. It's this cross of Leviathan. And remember, the proud children were the ones who were going to follow the Leviathan. Here's Miley Cyrus. Miley Cyrus has an album called One Sun. And then she's literally showing herself burning the earth. And then if you look at the right-hand side, she's dressed up like a sun. Do these people have a fetish with the sun? Explain to me why so many people are so into the sun. And then before you answer that question, first answer the question of, do they practice magic? If you answer those two questions, you're going to find yourself looking at the Bible in a very uncomfortable way. Rock Mafia features Miley Cyrus, Morning Sun. Wait a minute, what was Lucifer called? The morning star? Son of the morning? Okay, so then what do you think she's depicting here? When she says the Rock Mafia, what's a mafia? Well, mafia is like a mob, like a cartel. Okay, what's a rock? Well, Christ was the rock, was he not? Yeah. So then what's this? Remember, there were two rocks in the Bible. There was a counterfeit rock. We learned that there was a vine of Jerusalem, but there was also a vine of Sodom and Gomorrah. Is this the vine of Sodom and Gomorrah? In the widest sense, magic is the attempt to influence persons in events by recourse to superhuman powers. It is the science of the occult. So what's magic? Influencing people. Can celebrities influence people? You bet they can. Can celebrities be idolized? You bet they can. Could celebrities become idols and then call in spirits into themselves? Of course they could. That's what invocation is. So then here we're seeing that in the occult, magic is the influence of people. I mean, I influence people, but I'm not a magician. It's the influence of people using superhuman powers. What are the superhuman powers? Book of Ephesians 6:12. Forces and principalities. We're not fighting against flesh and blood. It says the word derives from magi, a priestly caste in Medea, whose functions have largely been associated with magic ever since. So the word magic, the magic word comes from magi. Well, magi were in the Bible. Weren't they those individuals that visited Christ? And then you'll notice here, a priestly caste in Medea. Well, where are we seeing magic today? On the television. What's television called? Media.
For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, the authorities, against the powers of the dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Brothers and sisters, the sword is coming.
So again, we can see there's a commonality here. Both the Catholics and the Freemasons, they have the same symbol. And you can see it's a cross with a crown. And we see that slogan, in hoc signo vinces. And the in hoc signo vinces shows up as the acronym IHS, which is inside of a sun. And that sun is at the Super Bowl. That sun is at the Oscars. That sun is on MTV. And I see some of the most perverse stuff at these different halftime shows. Every year, they're trying to like make it a little bit more racy. One year, they had the Baphomet. One year, it was Justin Timberlake. He tore half the shirt off of Janet Jackson, and she had a nipple ring of a sun. Pope Francis, he's the first Jesuit pope. Look at his coat of arms. Look in the very center. Well, it's got the Jesuit sun. Yeah, exactly. the thing that we see everywhere. In hoc signo vinces, in this name we conquer. On the right side, what do we see? That's the Knights Templar. Well, those are the Freemasons. So here's my question. Why do these two have the exact same symbols? There is a slight difference, though. Let me tell you what the difference is. The Masons, their sun looks like it's light. The Jesuits, their sun is dark. So we've got two suns, a twin sun, a dark sun and a light sun. Maybe one sun is trying to cast the truth, and the other sun is trying to cast the shadow. Ostara must be a symbol for the sun. I mean, it's directly behind her. Or if it's not the sun, remember, they're sneaky, it might be a star that precedes the sun. What star would that be? Every morning before the sun comes out, the planet Venus comes up first. It's almost like Venus is in a chariot pulling the sun up every time the sun rises. Venus was called the morning star. Can you see the reason why? It's also called the star of the dawn. When's dawn? The morning. So the star that comes out first in the morning that precedes the sun and pulls it out, could that be Helios? Could that be Apollo in his chariot pulling the sun? Etymology. Easter, Oster, Ostara, High German. Linguistic siblings stemming from a common origin. And look what it says. The modern English East also derives from this root. So the word Easter, yeah, you see the word East in it because East is actually pulled from this word Easter. And it means east towards the dawn. So Easter or Oster literally means east towards the dawn. Well, wait a minute. Wasn't Venus, the morning star, called the star of the dawn? Is this what this is about? Is Easter associated to Venus? Isaiah 14:12. Let's look at the International Standard Version. How have you fallen from heaven, day star, son of the dawn? I'll repeat that, son of the dawn. How have you been thrown down to earth, you who have laid the nation low, or laid low the nation? Look at the KJV. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weakest the nations? So the star of the dawn, or the son of the morning, or Lucifer, that's Venus. It's all the same thing. So what is Easter? Easter must have something to do with Venus. Look what it says here. We have this word Hallel. So in the Bible, when we see the word Lucifer, that's not Hebrew, that's English. In Hebrew, the word is Hallel. Hallel means Venus as the brilliant, bright, or shining one. And it actually says right here, it's referring to Isaiah 14:12. Didn't we just read Isaiah 14:12? So Isaiah 14:12 was not talking about a devil with horns running around. Isaiah 14:12 was talking about the planet Venus. Can't deny it. Isaiah 14:12. If we look, we see Hallel, 1966, is Lucifer. So that's the planet Venus. When it was talking about the son of the morning, the star of dawn, we're talking about the planet Venus. That's the devil. And you're like, how, the devil's a planet? Yup. If we take a look at St. Peter's Key, here's something interesting. Here's the pagan wheel of the year. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 points. Here's St. Peter's Key. Looks like there's 8 points. And of course, on the east side, we look where March is, where the spring is. What do we see? Oh, there's Ostara. Who's Ostara? Well, that's High German. Give me the Old English. Oster, Easter. Yeah, the word that's not in the Bible. So here we go. Perfectly overlaps. What were they designing here at St. Peter's Key? It sure looks like it's the pagan wheel of the year. But I guess when you notice all these different church holidays that don't show up in the Bible, I mean, there's all kinds of things. Ash Wednesday, this stuff is not biblical. But for some reason, I can find it outside the Bible in the occult. Anytime I take a look into Wicca, anytime I look into neo-paganism, sure enough, there's another holiday that overlaps with the church that doesn't show up in the Bible. Look at this, ad orientem, meaning to the east. In ecclesiastical Latin, is a phrase used to describe the eastward orientation of Christian prayer and Christian worship, comprising the preposition ad, which means toward in Latin, and oriens, meaning Rising, sunrise, east. So what does ad orientem mean? It means you're supposed to pray towards the east. Ezekiel 8:16. And he brought me into the inner court of the house of the Lord. And behold, at the entrance of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, there were about 25 men with their backs towards the temple of the Lord. Where's the temple of the Lord? It's towards the west. And their faces towards the east, worshiping the sun towards the east. And what does ad orientem mean in Latin? It means the congregation is going to face towards the east. Why wouldn't they model the Vatican and the worship facing towards the west the same way it's said in the Bible? Here's another question. The Masons, their temples are also set up so you come in the door in the west and you face the worshipful master in the east. Deuteronomy 17:3. And contrary to my command, has worshipped other gods, bowing down to them, or to the sun, the moon, or the stars in the sky. The sun, the moon. So wait a minute. Gods and sun, moon, and stars in the sky. Are you starting to see what's going on here? A form of idolatry is worshiping the stars in the sky. The people have no clue when they're doing these different rituals that these rituals came from somewhere else, and the rituals came from the worship of the sun, the moon, the stars in the sky. That's why Ostara has such strong connections to Venus, because Venus is the star of dawn. It's the morning star. And who's Oster? Well, it represented the dawn. Deuteronomy 17, the verse we just read, look at the title, Purge the Idolater. So if a man or a woman among you in one of the towns that the Lord your God gives you is found doing evil in the sight of the Lord your God by transgressing his covenant, his agreement, and going to worship other gods, bowing down to them, or to the sun, the moon, or the stars, or any of the host of heaven, which I have forbidden. And if it is reported and you hear about it, you must investigate it thoroughly. If the report is true and such an abomination has happened in Israel, you must bring out to your gates the man or woman who has done this evil thing, and you must stone that person to death. So you must, I'm just reading the bottom here. So you must purge the evil from among you. So the people that worship the stars, the Egyptians who worship the sun, the people who worship the moon, that's idolatry. And Israel was not supposed to have anything to do with them. You are transgressing the agreement you made with God when you participate. It's forbidden. Back in the day, you would have got stoned. I mean, there's lots of things you get stoned for back in the day until the blood of Christ. Astrolatry. Astrolatry is the worship of the stars and other heavenly bodies as deities. Okay, so stars can be worshipped as gods, or the association of deities with heavenly bodies. The most common instances are sun gods and moon gods in polytheistic systems worldwide. Didn't we notice that when we looked at the Oscars and we looked at all these different, Super Bowl, they're clearly worshiping the sun. Those are church symbols at the football game. Also notable is the association of the planets with the deities in Babylon. Excuse me? Yeah, that's right. They worship planets in Babylon. The place that tried to challenge God, Genesis 11, if you want to check it again, they were worshiping planets. And hence in the Greco-Roman religion, what does that say? Greco-Roman, that's Greece and Rome. The word Helios is where you get the word hell. So you can tell that the people that go to hell, they're worshiping the planets, the same thing that people did in Babylon when they tried to take on God. And here they give some examples. Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Okay, well, Venus we've seen. Venus is the morning star. That's in Isaiah. Clearly people were worshiping it. The term astrotheology is used in the 18th to 19th century scholarship aiming at the discovery of the original religion, particularly primitive monotheism, unlike astrolatry, which usually implies polytheism, frowned upon as idolatrous by Christian author since Eusebius. Astrotheology is any religious system founded on the observation of the heavens. Let me repeat that. So astrolatry, idolatry, okay? Religious systems founded on the observation of the heavens. So if you're noticing that Easter is calculated off of the full moon, I'll read that again. Any religious system founded on the observation of the heavens. You can't come up with the date of Easter, guys, unless you look at the full moon. And in particular, maybe monotheistic. Gods, goddesses, and demons may also be considered personifications of astronomical phenomena, such as lunar eclipses, planetary alignments, and apparent interactions of planetary bodies with stars. So demons, gods, and goddesses, they could be stars. Astrotheology is used by Jan Urban, Jordan Maxwell, and Andrew Rutledge in reference to the earliest known forms of religion and nature worship. Okay, so if you worship Mother Earth, if you're into nature worship, you're going to find that within those religions in the New Age, there's going to be a lot of mixing with what? Star worship. Now, here's something interesting. This is from March 10th of 2013. It says, conclave chatter dominates the Vatican Soccer League. The matches are held at St. Peter's Pontifical Oratory, okay, the church, on a field named for the former American Cardinals, Francis, I love the last name, Spellman, like spells. The season runs from February to May, and listen to this, and the winner takes home the Saturno Trophy, consisting of an old-fashioned priest's hat with a wide circular brim, like the planet Saturn's rings. On top of the soccer ball and a pair of black spikes. Retired Pope Benedict once presented a copy of the Saturno Trophy, as was Cardinal Teresa Bertone, the Camerlingo, or the Chamberlain presiding over the Holy See during the days with no Pope. Okay, so two people, one person who wasn't the Pope taking the position of the Pope, and a retired Pope, they both took a trophy of the planet Saturn. Okay, strange. Did you know when the last day of Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, the last day of him being Pope, he wore a very special hat. Let me show you the hat. This September the 6th, 2006 photo shows Pope Benedict wearing a Saturno hat inspired by the ringed planet Saturn to shield himself from the sun as he waves to the crowd of faithful prior to his weekly general audience in St. Peter's Square at the Vatican. He's wearing a Saturn hat at the Vatican and waving everyone off as he retires. Are you for real? And what was astrolatry about? Well, the worship of the stars. It's idol worship. And what are we noticing about Easter? It's connected to Venus. Last time I checked, Venus is a star.
Flamma seius, Lucifer matutinus inveniat. Ille in quam Lucifer, qui nescit occasum, Christus filius tuus, ille in quam Lucifer, qui nescit occasum, Christus filius tuus, Christus filius tuus, qui regressus ab inferis, humano generi serenus iluxit, et tecum vivit et regnat, in saecula saeculorum.
So every Easter, every Oster, every Ostara, every replacement of the Passover on the Sunday, I'll repeat that, on the Sunday, we have people doing a hymn, and the hymn is what? Christ is the son of Lucifer? If you believe that, you need to pick up your Bible. Deuteronomy 17, remember, purge the idolater. This is idolatry. This is idolatry at its finest. Did you know the practice of Lent is centered around the practice of idolatry? I bet you don't know the story of Lent. You probably just see people fasting for a period of time, but you don't have a clue why they're doing it. Let's take a look why.
No graven images. That's what God told Moses on the mountain. The God of Israel was too big to fit into a temple, too great to be reduced to a statue. So the Israelites were forbidden to even try to make any image of God. But did anything change when God became flesh? Was an image of Jesus really an image of God? Early in the church's history, these questions didn't really come up. But in the 4th century, when persecution of Christians ended, paintings of Jesus became more common. Now, by the middle of the 6th century, religious icons were a regular part of Christian worship in many places, but all that began to change in the early 7th century. In the year 613, a merchant from the Arabian city of Mecca claimed that the angel Gabriel gave him a message. Now, this man was on a mission from God, or so he thought. The merchant's name was Muhammad. His followers became known as Muslims, and in the year 630, he rocked the Kaaba, which was a pagan place of worship in Mecca, when he carried out all the images, destroyed the statues of the Arab gods. Now, from that point on, many Muslims saw the use of religious images as nothing less than idol worship. Now, during the 600s and the 700s, Muslim armies swept across Africa and Asia. They took Syria, Egypt, North Africa, Crete. They even made it partway across Spain before a general named Charles the Hammer stopped them at the Battle of Tours. Now, in many cases, the Muslims allowed greater religious freedom than Christians had, but still their negative outlook on images had a big impact. Around the year 726, the emperor of the Eastern Empire said icons were no longer part of Christian worship, and this split Christians into two groups, the icon smashers, or iconoclasts, and the icon kissers. Now, when the emperor sent his officers to smash an icon of Jesus that towered over a palace door, he learned a valuable lesson. Never underestimate the wrath of a woman who's about to lose her icon. See, a crowd of women attacked the emperor's officers with pots and pans, and then a nun named Theodosia knocked him off his ladder and killed him. Now, she was arrested and sentenced to death by having a ram's horn hammered through her neck, which seems like a rather uncomfortable way to die. And then in the end, it would take another church council to decide whether the church would side with the kissers or with the smashers. In the year 787, Empress Irene of the Eastern Empire gathered more than 300 bishops for the Second Council of Nicaea, the last church council that brought together the Eastern and Western churches. And there they decided this, that images of Jesus, Mary, angels, the saints, all of those, it was okay to hang them in churches and in homes, but only if they were two-dimensional images. Statues were forbidden, and no image was ever to be worshipped. So the kissers won, and icons continue to be part of the worship in both East and Western churches.
It is the first Sunday of Lent. At the end of the Divine Liturgy, the people of the Church, clergy and laity alike, line up in a procession, holding icons of all different types and sizes. They travel around the church or the city, singing triumphant hymns and prayers. Even without knowing the reasons behind this event, one gets the sense that the first Sunday of Lent is a joyous occasion. To many people outside of the Orthodox Church, icons are a foreign, perhaps even blasphemous thing. To the Orthodox, however, they are an important tradition, one that was nearly erased from the church doctrine in the year 726 AD. In that year, Emperor Leo III demanded that icons be removed from the city of Constantinople. This began the split within the Byzantine Empire, between the iconoclasts, or the destroyers of icons, and the iconophiles, or the friends of the icons. These titles were more than just names. Records state that the iconoclasts really did invade the churches and destroy icons on behalf of their beliefs. Some iconoclastic emperors even went so far as to torture citizens who were found hiding icons. This intense division between Christians eventually brought about the Seventh Ecumenical Council, which dealt primarily with the controversy surrounding holy icons. The council was implemented in 787 AD under Empress Irene and Patriarch Tarasios of Constantinople. Turning in favor of the icons, the council agreed upon a doctrine that specified that icons should be venerated but not worshipped. This decision silenced the iconoclasts who believed icons were heretical. The decree created by the council states, "We define that the holy icons should be exhibited in the holy churches of God, on the sacred vessels and liturgical vestments, on the walls, furnishings, and in houses, and along the roads. We define also that they should be kissed, and that they are an object of veneration and honor, but not of real worship, which is reserved for Him who is the subject of our faith, and is proper for the divine nature. He who venerates the icon venerates in it the reality for which it stands. It was not until 843 AD, however, that the icons were officially restored to the churches. It is because of this event that the Orthodox Church has a day to remember the triumph of the true faith against the iconoclasts. The remembrance of the final restoration of the holy icons takes place on the first Sunday of Great Lent, and is celebrated with a procession of icons. The remembrance of the final restoration of the holy icons takes place on the first Sunday of Great Lent. On the first Sunday of Great Lent.
So Lent is the celebration of the victory that the iconophiles had to be able to keep their icons, their idols. It says in the book of Exodus that you can't have anything of the host of heaven, anything of down below, or anything in the abyss depicted as a statue or image. You can't make an image of anything in the heavens or hell, nothing. So the iconophiles might have won, but at the same time, biblically, no, they didn't. Here we can see this is supposed to be St. Peter. And everyone in the church comes up to St. Peter and they kiss his foot. They've kissed his foot so many times that the foot's like fading away. It's metal. 1 Kings 19:18. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. Am I insinuating that this statue is actually a statue of Baal, not St. Peter? Absolutely. I'll prove it. Take a look at the two fingers raised. How do they know that that Peter was raising these two fingers? I mean, I just find it very interesting that we notice that Easter has an association to Ostara and the spring goddess Ostara. We can tell because it's calculated off the moon. Secondly, when we take a look at the pagan god Pan, which is the Baphomet, well, we already read the horned god was associated to the goddess, which was worshipped in the spring. And then here we can see the church has a symbol of a man holding two fingers, which is supposed to be Peter, but at the same time, the Baphomet also holds up those two same fingers. Now, if you look at the Baphomet, on the middle of the Baphomet's head, see the pentagram? The pentagram is a symbol of Venus. So while you're looking at the horned god, Venus can be seen right on his forehead. So in other words, Beauty and the Beast. It's God and the goddess. They're hiding both in artwork. But if you already knew that the Baphomet's androgynous, it really doesn't matter, because regardless of what side of the Baphomet you're looking at, it's a male-female deity. Now, of course, if this male-female deity is the planet Venus, how could we explain that? Well, Venus is both the morning star and the evening star. Matthew 16:23, and Jesus turned and said to who? To Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of man." So it's kind of pathetic to see that here we have God himself. Obviously, Peter, at this point, he wasn't thinking about the plan of heaven. If you know what Matthew 16:23 is talking about, we're talking about the period where Peter basically doesn't want Christ to be crucified, doesn't want Christ to die. Christ reveals to his apostles that he must die. And then Peter, he wants to stop it. And so, of course, Peter's intentions are selfish. Since this was a plan of salvation for the whole world, by Peter trying to stop Christ, he was operating in the wrong spirit. Remember, spirits enter in and out of people. When people contradict themselves, when people lie, when people deceive, that's a spirit going in and out of people. And so here we see, "Get behind me, Satan." In other words, Jesus recognized the spirit that was in Peter was not the Holy Spirit. That was Satan. He was trying to stop the plan. And the plan was for Christ to die and resurrect so he could overcome death. Take a look. Look what St. Peter is sitting on. Do you recognize this? Do you know the symbol? Because you should. We saw in the Baphomet, there was a 5-pointed star. So if this is in fact Baal, and this is not St. Peter, and people are kissing a statue that is of Baal, well then I would expect this symbol to point to the goddess. Look familiar? This is Aphrodite. Aphrodite, on one side I see a purplish looking blue. On the other side I see scarlet. Have you figured it out yet? Who wears scarlet and purple? Revelation 13:3 and 5. And the angel carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, where I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. Wow, this woman is bawling. She's got a lot of gems. She held in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and impurities of her sexual immorality. It must have been a sex cult. It must have been a fertility cult. Wasn't Easter about fertility? Aren't the rabbits about fertility? Aren't the eggs about fertility? And on her forehead, a mysterious name was written: Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and the abominations of the earth. This is Babylon. Did anyone else in history ever accuse the church of being Babylon? Was his name Martin Luther? Did he write a thesis and nail it to a bunch of churches and start the Protestant Reformation? Kind of see why. Babylon, scarlet and purple, holds a golden cup, the mother of all the pagan churches. Does anyone else fit this? Is it some church in the East you haven't heard of? Somewhere weird temple where the monks are in Asia that they wear scarlet and purple? No, you have scarlet and purple worn by the cardinals and the bishops. And you also see a golden cup. I've got a question for you. What did the priests in the Bible wear? Well, the answer was they were blue. I mean, when you look at the outfit that Aaron was wearing, it's primarily blue. Well, here we're seeing the complete opposite color. So how are these priests able to say that we represent the Bible, but they look totally different than the priests in the Bible? They're wearing yarmulkes, which is interesting because that's usually something that Jewish people would wear. They're holding a golden cup in their hand, and they've changed the Sabbath to Sunday, and they've changed the Passover to Easter. You know what the word Babylon means? It means confusion. Do you think that people might be spiritually confused? Venus in mythology. Remember, Venus was Lucifer. Now, I want to point something out. There is a defense that the Catholics used for that video that I just showed you, where it said that Christ, the son of the morning star. Here's the problem. In the Bible, both Christ and Lucifer are referred to as morning stars. It's not that they're the same thing, it's a position. A position in heaven is called the morning stars. Don't believe it? Look in the book of Job. In the book of Job, it specifically says the morning stars were singing. They were praising and worshiping. So the morning star is a position held by multiple heavenly beings. So, of course, when the Catholics try to deflect this, they say, well, you know, that Christ was a morning star and Lucifer was a morning star. And so we said the name Lucifer, but we were actually referring to Lucifer, the Latin word meaning morning star. But when you start to actually look at the symbols, you start to realize, nah, that's not what's going on here. What you're saying does make logical sense, and it does fit with the Bible. But all the customs and rituals and ceremonies, they don't. As a matter of fact, if you take a look here, when was Venus worshipped? On Friday. Okay, so Venus, she's in a clamshell coming out of the ocean, right? Anyone hear of Fish Friday in the Catholic Church? Venus is in a clamshell coming out of the ocean. And it's called Good Friday, the day that Christ died. Why would you call the day that Christ died the Good Friday? I guess you could say it's the victory over sin, but at the same time, I'm starting to wonder, is this church actually representing Christ, or are they just acting like a corporation, a political entity, a Walmart, a McDonald's, controlling people by holding a book in front of them and saying, we're the professionals, trust us. But when you read the book, what does the book say? The book says everything's backwards. Venus is Lucifer. Venus is Aphrodite. Let's find out who the father of Venus or Aphrodite is. It says parents. In Homer's Iliad, the father was Zeus. Who's Zeus? Well, Zeus is Jupiter. Who's Jupiter? Temple of Jupiter, Roman Heliopolis. What does it say? It doesn't say, you know, Eastern mystics. It says Roman Heliopolis. Heliopolis, that's the Greek god, Helios. Helios is where the Christians get the word hell. Roman Heliopolis, Temple of Jupiter. The Temple of Jupiter is a colossal Roman temple, the largest of the Roman world, situated at where? Baalbek. Jupiter is Baal from the Bible. Why do I see symbols of Venus, which is the child of Jupiter, which is Baal from the Bible? Try to dodge that one. Okay, you can tell me whatever you want in regards to Lucifer being the morning star and Christ being the morning star. I'm pointing the finger at the church and asking you, you changed Saturday to Sunday. You changed the Sabbath, which was a commandment, and you moved it to the Lord's Day. Well, Jupiter was a lord. He was Lord Baal. You moved it to the sun day. And then what else did you do? You switched up Easter, because Easter is supposed to be the Passover. You changed the date, you changed the name. So in other words, the Passover, which was supposed to be kept for all generations, it's gone. It's out the door. And instead, we've got some weird resurrection thing with a changing date, and then this Ostara goddess, which is where the name Easter comes from. And she just happens to be who? The daughter of Baal. The daughter of Baal. Easter is the daughter of Baal. Ridiculous. So here's Baal, and everyone's kissing his foot, and the Bible said, I will reserve for myself 7,000 Israelites that do not kiss Baal. Don't kiss his foot. Why do you think people are kissing the Pope's hand? They're kissing his signet ring. Where in the Bible did anyone kiss the ring of Aaron? Aaron was the high priest. This is Baal. This is Baal worship. And Baal worship is sun worship. And it's said in the book of Ezekiel that most people would be doing what? They'd have their backs towards the Lord and they'd be facing the sun. Yeah, it's called ad orientem. It means facing the east. Every time that they do a Catholic mass, they are facing the sun. And what do we know about the sun? Before the sun rises, what happens? Venus pulls it. Well, who's Venus? Venus is Astarte in the Bible. Astarte and Baal are playing off of each other because Astarte, Venus, precedes the sun, and then Baal is the sun. Astarte, Wikipedia. Astarte is a Hellenized form of the ancient Near Eastern goddess Ashtoreth, similar to Astarte. Alat was as well associated with the morning star Venus. So Astarte, Alat, these are all different names for the same goddess, but they're all pointing towards where? The same star. And I thought that worshiping the stars was idolatry. And I thought that when I read how you were supposed to handle this type of idolatry in the Old Testament was people were getting stoned. That's pretty severe. Queen of Heaven, Antiquity. Queen of Heaven was a title given to a number of ancient sky goddesses worshipped throughout the ancient Mediterranean and Near East during ancient times. So Queen of Heaven, this went to a whole bunch of different sky goddesses. Not one, many sky goddesses. Goddesses known to have been referred to by the title include Inanna, Anat, Isis, we know that one, that's Egyptian. Nut, that's also Egyptian, that was preceding Isis. And now we see Astarte. Who's Astarte? That's Venus, that's Aphrodite. Ah, that's what we saw with St. Peter. He was sitting on a clamshell. And then it says, and possibly Asherah by the prophet Jeremiah. So the Asherah one isn't a perfect fit, and I'll explain why. A lot of Christians have went down this road where they've started to blur the lines of these pagan goddesses. And I'll explain what the difference is. It's subtle, but there is a difference. Inanna was also associated with rain and storms and with the planet Venus. So since we know they're all the same thing, I can read about Inanna and learn about Isis, or read about Inanna and learn about Astarte. It's just different cultures adding or removing some details, but they're all blended together. So if I see Inanna, she was associated with rain and storms. Who in the Bible was associated with rain and storms? Baal was a storm god. And notice how we see that Baal and Astarte, they're always close by. So in other words, when I look at St. Peter, which isn't St. Peter, Christ gave me the heads up. Christ said, hey, get behind me, Satan. And that's the statue that everyone's kissing. I get it. Peter was obviously a loyal disciple of Christ. But when Peter was pushed, what happened? During the crucifixion, Christ said, he's like, you will deny me 3 times. So Peter, when he was challenged, when they're taking away Christ and the Romans are bringing him into the Sanhedrin, all of a sudden, what did Peter do? They said, hey, are you with this guy? We're pretty sure you're with this guy. Nope. They asked him a second time. Nope. Third time. Nope. And then what happened? A rooster cawed. And then Peter started to cry because Christ said he would do exactly that. And the Catholics said, well, Peter's the rock of the church. That is a mistranslation. You see, when you look at the word Peter, it's Petros. And you have a difference between the word stone and the word pebble. You see, Christ was the rock of the church. Peter was a disciple, which means he was a chip off the old block. He was a fellow disciple. He was a follower. He wasn't the stone. He wasn't the rock of the church. He was a disciple, a pebble, a follower, Petros. So this was all based on a mistranslation. So Christ somehow knew, and I'm not going to say somehow, I mean, he's outside of space and time. God is beyond us. He knew that in the future, that this false church was going to nail themselves to Peter. And then they would use that, and you would see with the symbolism, hey, that's not Peter at all. That's Zeus. That's Jupiter. That's Baal. That's the sky god. And if you don't believe it, all you have to look for is the clamshell, because the clamshell will show you the goddess. The same way you see the star on the Baphomet's head, you will see that symbol of Venus, the clamshell, on St. Peter. That's not St. Peter. Why are you kissing a statue? Iconoclasm. Remember, we were supposed to smash the idols. In the Bible, the Jews smashed the idols. They tore down the Asherah poles. They burnt down the groves. They ripped apart all these different idols. How come today we're kissing them? It's funny, they say it's not idol worship, it's veneration. You're kissing a stone. Like, what do you think? St. Peter is dead. What is he going to do for you if you kiss his foot? That you're kissing the foot of Baal. If you take a look, you'll see here on the Vatican's website, it says, Venerable Brethren, health and apostolic blessing. From the earliest ages of the Catholic Church, a Christian people, whether in time of triumph or more especially in a time of crisis, has addressed prayers of petition and hymns of praise and veneration to the Queen of Heaven. Where in the Bible did anyone give praise or hymns of veneration to the Queen of Heaven? Well, it was the book of Jeremiah. Was it a good thing? No, we've read this several times. In the book of Jeremiah, the prophet Jeremiah is telling them, stop doing all this. Have nothing to do with this Queen of Heaven. And who specifically kept this? It was the women that said, our husbands know. They didn't care. They didn't do anything. We're going to continue worshiping her because nothing happened. And what did we find out from our previous Sabbath studies? The Queen of Heaven in the book of Jeremiah is Isis. Who's Isis? Astarte. We just learned that. Who's Astarte? That's Aphrodite, and that's that clamshell that you see on St. Peter's throne where everyone's kissing the foot. I don't know why a Christian would want to kiss a statue. And never has the hope that wavered, which they placed on the mother of the divine King, Jesus Christ, nor has that failed by which we taught that Mary, the Virgin Mother of God, reigns with a mother's solitude over the entire world, just as she is crowned in heavenly blessedness, the glory of a queen. Talk about adding to the Bible. The Queen of Heaven was never called Mary. Mary was never called the Queen of Heaven. Read the Gospels. That's where Mary shows up. You show me one verse that tells me that she was a queen. As a matter of fact, when Mary, which is Christ's mother, came and tried to interrupt him, what did he do? He told his mother and his brothers to go away. He said, this is my family. Who's his family? The Christian disciples, the believers, the spiritual Jews, both Jews and Gentile. That was Christ's family. His biological family didn't have as strong of a connection as he did to his spiritual family. And so here we can see what they've done is they've overlapped this name, the Queen of Heaven, with Mary, the mother of Christ, but there is no connection between Mary and the Queen of Heaven. The only Queen of Heaven that people venerated in the Bible was a pagan goddess, and that was Isis, which is Astarte, which is the symbol that you see on St. Peter's chair. Mary is the Queen of Heaven. So in other words, the Catholic Church's point of view is that Mary is the Queen of Heaven. Well, this is Astarte. Astarte is Venus, and Venus is Lucifer, the star that has two sides, a dark side and a light side. And John in the Bible made it very clear, God is light. There is no darkness in him. So if one side of Venus is the Queen of Heaven, is the other side the Whore of Babylon? Is that the two Venuses? Look at the Venus cycle. Every day when the sun rises, we see the morning star. And then every evening before the sun sets, we see the evening star. And the star dies and it resurrects. Are you sure that on Easter, Ostara, you're not really celebrating the cycle of Venus? Astarte and Ostara, these are the two aspects of Venus. To a pagan, these are not the same. If you were to say Ostara and Astarte and Ishtar, they're all the same thing, no, you're wrong. Technically, you're wrong. Because, of course, when you look at this, you have to understand that the Masons worship one half, and then the Vatican worships the other half, the dark and the light side. So what's happening is, if you've noticed throughout history, there has been a war between Masons and Catholics. It's been going on forever. But they have the same symbols. This is the Whore of Babylon. We've got scarlet and purple. And what does Babylon mean? Babel or Babylon? Confusion by mixing. What are we mixing together? We're mixing the pagan religions together. Remember, Babylon in the Bible was the mother of all harlots. It was the mother of all these other religions. That's why they call themselves the Mother Church. It's the mother of all these other pagan religions.
La mayor parte de los habitantes del planeta se declaran creyentes. Esto debería provocar un diálogo entre las religiones. No debemos dejar de orar por él y colaborar con quienes piensan distinto.
Confío en Buda.
Creo en Dios.
Creo en Jesucristo.
Creo en Dios, Alá.
Muchos piensan distinto, sienten distinto, buscan a Dios o encuentran a Dios de diversa manera. En esta multitud, en este abanico de religiones, hay una sola certeza que tenemos para todos. Todos somos hijos de Dios.
Creo en el amor.
Creo en el amor.
Creo en el amor.
Creo en el amor.
Confío en vos para difundir mi petición de este mes. Que el diálogo sincero entre hombres y mujeres de diversas religiones conlleve frutos de paz y justicia. Confío en tu oración.
So to a Christian who's never read the Bible from cover to cover, when you see a video like that, you think a person like me is a big jerk. But when you actually read the Bible, what do you find out? There is one path to God. Does any Christian know where the path to God is? It's through Christ. The only way to get through the Father is through Christ. Does anyone remember that line from the Gospels? There is only one path, one way. So you're telling me the church that introduced us to Easter, Ostara, Babylon, they're mixing actual worship with false worship. It looks like it's a Christian church on the outside, but everything about it is backwards. You got rid of the Passover. We're supposed to keep that forever. As a matter of fact, the Passover was so important that if you were unclean, we actually reserved another date that you could do it. When? A month later. That's how important it was. And what did they do? They said, well, you know what? The Jews, they have their date for the Passover. We're the Christians. And I guess since we are the Christians, we're going to be different. So we're going to base our holy day off of the full moon after the spring equinox and call it Easter, which just coincidentally matches the Anglo-Saxon Ostara, which coincidentally matches with Venus, which shows up all the way through the church. Babylon is confusion, and the people are horribly, horribly confused. Since people are thinking with their hearts and they're not thinking with their heads, they're negating the word of God and instead just doing whatever feels good. Lucifer's the love god. Remember, who's Aphrodite? Wasn't Aphrodite associated to Cupid? And isn't Cupid a love god? So Cupid, it was called Eros, Aphrodite, Venus, Lucifer. Are you starting to see the pattern here? Talk about trickery. And we haven't even gotten to the rabbits yet. We haven't even talked about the rabbits and the eggs because we already know it has to do with the Feast of Ostara. Unless, of course, the Christians and the Wiccans, they both share this tradition together. But of course, the Christians didn't have a horned god. The horned god in Christianity, well, that was the devil. Can we serve God by removing a holy day and then mixing rituals of a fertility goddess? Maybe I'm wrong. Let's check the Bible. Deuteronomy 12, 30 and 32. Take care that you not be ensnared to follow them after they have been destroyed before you, and that you do not inquire about their gods, saying, how did these nations serve their gods? That I may also do the same. You shall not worship the Lord your God in that way. Let me repeat that. You shall not worship the Lord your God in that way. If the other nations, if they're doing their own little customs and rituals and they don't know God, because in Deuteronomy, what else did we find out? We found out in Deuteronomy 32 that these other religions, their gods were what? Angels. They were the sons of God, Benai Elohim. We read that in the Greek Septuagint just a week ago. You shall not worship the Lord your God in that way. For every abominable thing that the Lord hates, they have done for their gods. For they even burn their sons and daughters in the fire to their gods. As a matter of fact, all throughout Europe around Easter and in May, what do we have? The big bonfires. We have the Easter bonfires. In Germany, there's Easter bonfires everywhere. And what do the kids do? they run and they jump over the fire. That sounds really similar to what I read here. They're not burning and dying in there, but at the same time, where do you think these rituals came from? Everything that I command you, you shall be careful to do. So God says, be careful to listen to what I told you to do. If I told you to keep the Passover on the 14th of the first month, I don't want you following the Sunday after the first full moon after March 21st. I didn't tell you to do that. And then look what he says at the very end here. You shall not add to it or take from it. In other words, you can't take the Passover and add to it. You can't add the bunnies. You can't add the chocolate. You can't add the Easter egg hunts. You can't add to what God gave you. What he gave you, that was enough. That was it. That was good. No changing it. The Pope, nobody had the capability to do this. This is why the Protestants got so angry. They didn't even get angry over this. Martin Luther was mad because the church was collecting money, saying that people could come out of purgatory if they were to donate an indulgence. So in other words, your grandfather, he was a sinner, and you know he's in hell because he was a sinner. So if you want to give some money up, you can get him out of purgatory and get him into the kingdom. Where in the Bible is that? Does that sound like a Walmart to you, a McDonald's to you? Does that sound like a corporation that's trying to run the Bible? Here it says, why was Ostara, Oster associated to the bunny? So let's figure out, what's this bunny about? The hare and Easter. Whence comes the legend of the hare in connection with Easter? In Germany, and among the Pennsylvania Germans, toy rabbits or hares made of canton flannel stuffed with cotton are given as gifts on Easter morning. The children are told that this Ostara has laid the Easter eggs. This curious idea is thus explained. The hare was originally a bird. Now it's starting to understand why they have eggs. Rabbits don't lay eggs, they're mammals. So it says here, the hare was originally a bird and was changed into a quadruped by the goddess Ostara. Okay, so there was a bird changed into a hare by the goddess Ostara. Ostara, isn't that what we just studied in regards to where Easter came from? In gratitude to Ostara or Estra, the hare exercises its original bird function to lay eggs for the goddess on her festal day. So you can explain to all the children, the reason why we're giving you these chocolate bunnies that lay eggs is because the goddess Ostara, which is where Easter came from, which isn't in the Bible, we replaced it, we replaced the Passover. We believe that she turned a hare into a bird. Like, this alone sounds ridiculous. You wonder where things like Santa Claus came from, the Tooth Fairy. Here we have Ostara changing a rabbit into a bird. Like, you wonder where all these strange mythologies come from. Like, it's just silliness. And then people laugh at the Bible. You laugh at the Bible, but this is better. Origin of Easter rabbits. According to the Teutonic tradition, the bunny was once a bird. Okay, this is clearly not just one person's opinion. Who are the Teutonic Knights? Well, the Teutonic Knights during the 12th century, that was the Crusades. That's when all the Crusaders went and they tried to take back the Mount, the Temple Mount. Did they succeed? No. So the Teutonic Knights are the Germans. Those were the German Crusaders. So let's hear what the Teutonic Knights have to say about the bunny once as a bird. One of the quaint and interesting features of our modern Easter carnival is the appearance in shop windows side by side with the emblematic colored egg of a pert, tall-eared rabbit. And those who cannot understand why bunny should have a place in our Easter decorations shrug their shoulders and think it is a trick to please the children. But the legend of the Easter rabbit is one of the oldest in mythology and is mentioned in the early folklore of South Germany. Originally, it appears, the rabbit was a bird, which the ancient Teutonic goddess, Ostara goddess of the East, or the spring, transformed into a quadruped. So again, the bird transforms into a rabbit. Ostara did it. For this reason, the rabbit or hare is grateful, and in remembrance of its former condition as a bird and as a swift messenger of spring, and of the goddess whom it served, is able to lay colored eggs on her festival in the springtime. So now we have a rabbit that turned into a bird, or sorry, a bird that turned into a rabbit. And since the rabbit was once a bird, it can lay eggs, but not just eggs, it can lay eggs that are colored eggs. Yeah, tell this to children. Is able to lay colored Easter eggs on her festival in the springtime. The colors illustrating the theory that when it was a bird, the rabbit laid colored eggs, and an egg has always been a symbol of the resurrection, and therefore used as an illustration at Easter. Okay, here's my question. Are we talking the resurrection of Christ? Or are we talking about the resurrection of the sun and moon? Because this sounds like it's based on the equinox, and it sounds like it's the sun creeping up over the horizon after it died at Christmas. Are we talking about Christ, the man who died on the cross? Or are we talking about the sun that died on the pagan wheel? In other words, the zodiacal cross. My Christ is not a sun. It's a sun, S-O-N, not S-U-N. Easter, a relic of pagan days. Richmond, Virginia Times, March 30th, 1902. Claims the story reflects the blind and barbarous nature of the heathen Saxons. Well, we saw the Saxons come up already with Ostara. Strange as it may seem, Eastertide, like Christmas, is a relic of pagan days. Look, they knew this in 1902. What are we doing in 2021? In the former days, when the dawn of civilization was just beginning to break, that time of the year when winter was passing away and the summer approaching was made a period of festivity. The people, in their blind fashion, thanked the unseen beings who ruled the world for the breaking up of the frost time and prayed for plenteous harvests and fruitful flocks and herds. Remember, people were into agriculture and they didn't know God. So what did they do? They started praying to elementals. And we find in the Bible, forces and principalities, we're talking elemental spirits. And they said they were thanking the unseen beings. Maybe that's just a superstition. No, the Bible says the unseen beings are elemental forces, so they're real. When Christianity pushed its way further and further into the then barbaric world of early missionaries, not wishing to antagonize their prospective converts, took this festival and consecrated its observance to the new form of faith. We don't want to piss off the pagans. We want to invite them into the fold. So what we'll do is we'll modify our religion to meet their appetite. You can't do that. In England, the festival became known as Easter, from the goddess Ostara, and in the eggs so widely looked upon as a typical Easter is a mark of the old legend of a bird that was changed into a hare in the spring. So clearly, we can see why the rabbit lays eggs now. The only answer you have for young people who are wondering, Mom, Dad, why do we celebrate Jesus and the resurrection with rabbits that lay eggs? Looks like a woman took his place, son. As a matter of fact, a woman transformed this rabbit or this bird into a rabbit, but the rabbit still kept its capability to lay eggs from its prior bird form. That's crazy. So here's Ostara with the rabbits. Here's Ostara. She's on the left-hand side. So clearly you can tell that Ostara was associated to these rabbits, which just happens to be where you get the word Easter, which just happens to be nowhere in the Bible because, of course, they changed the Passover. And look behind her, you can also see the owl. And the owl is a symbol that shows up a lot in the occult, Freemasonry as well. But of course, we already saw there's symbols in the Catholic Church, primarily the Jesuits, and symbols in the Knights Templar, and they are identical. So here we see the rabbit painting an egg red. As a matter of fact, most of the eggs were typically painted red, and then later in time, as Easter was celebrated over years and years and years, now we have all these different colors. We got purple, yellow, red, blue, but originally these eggs were painted red. Ostara is connected with growth, renewal, abundance, new beginnings, and fertility. As symbols of rebirth and fertility, eggs and rabbits are sacred to her, as is the full moon. So Ostara was associated to the full moon. She had to do with fertility and rebirth. I wonder how you could mix that up with resurrection. Probably pretty easily. Did you know that the moon disappears for 3 days and reappears? Sounds a lot like Christ. Are they replacing Christ with the moon or the sun? The Council of Nicaea in 325 decreed that Easter should be observed on the Sunday following the first full moon after the spring equinox. So here we just found out that Ostara is connected to the full moon, and the church decided at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD that Easter should be observed on the first Sunday following the full moon after the spring equinox. Seeing the connections here? The name, the decisions they made, the people who were living in the area that they were trying to convert to the religion of Christianity. Hey, I guess we'll just compromise our religion and blend it with these other ones and then just babble on everything together so that way we can get more converts, right? If we are a business, if we are a corporation, what's the corporation trying to do? Expand, right? Everything in corporations is about financial growth. If your company is not growing, as a CEO, you're failing. So if the Pope is the CEO, well, then you have to keep expanding. And what better way to expand than to compromise on your religion, change it, pretend like you had the authority to do it, even though you don't. And then you have more converts. You've got more people. You're now a bigger political power. And if you're a bigger political power and you get to collect 1/10 of everyone's money, you get more cash. Why originally the red Easter eggs? The worship of Ostara was a fertility cult, and the egg a symbol of fertility. The worship of Ostara was calculated based on the full moon. The moon has a 28-day cycle, like the female ovulation cycle. The red egg, the red egg is a symbol for the female ovulation. The children originally painted the eggs red to commemorate the ovulation of the goddess Ostara. That's why you're painting the eggs. So why the chocolate eggs? We've answered the question of why a rabbit. Well, it was a rabbit that was originally a bird, and then the rabbit was changed into a bird by Ostara, and then it was able to still lay eggs. And then we found out that since it's a fertility cult, and the fertility cult is associated to a goddess, well, if it's a red egg, it's the ovulation cycle of a moon, which has 28 days. But why the chocolate eggs? You don't even want to know the answer. I'll tell you the answer because I have to. But at the same time, you want to know because you don't want to tell your kids this. The reason why you give your children specifically a chocolate egg, it's a fertility cult, and eventually the men hijacked it, and the fertility cult practiced sodomy. The chocolate is a symbol for sodomy. It's disgusting, but that's what it is. Deal with it. In pictures, Christians celebrate Easter around the world. How sad. So here we see BBC News. And then look at this. Catholics gathered after sunset in the village of Ragatna, Belarus, to kindle an Easter fire. I'm going to point something out here. This place is called Belarus. Bel is connected to Baal. We saw that in Freemasonry. So here is an Easter fire. Well, that's weird because in Deuteronomy, they talked about this. Take care that you not be ensnared to follow them after they have been destroyed before you, and that you do not inquire about their gods, saying, how do these nations serve these other gods? That I may also do the same. You shall not worship the Lord your God in that way, for every abominable thing that the Lord hates they have done for their gods. For they even burn their sons and their daughters in the fire to their gods. Everything that I shall command you, you shall be careful to do. You shall not add to it or take from it. So you cannot take some of these traditions and mix them in with the Passover or any other Christian holiday for that matter. So the Easter fire, or look what it's called, Ostara, that's where it came from, is a symbol of light in the darkness. It can be as simple as lighting a candle or as big as the bonfires which are lit all over Germany at Easter. Because fire is a symbol of light, of renewal, it signifies the end of winter and the coming of spring. So what really signifies the end of winter and the coming of spring? When the sun passes over the equinox. What did the people in Asia do that were the sun worshippers? They would meditate and stare at candles. We've studied this. Okay, so the monks in the temple, when they would sit there cross-legged and meditate staring at a candle, it was a symbol for the sun. And so these fires or candles, remember, during the Easter Vigil, what do? Everyone walks around with candles. Oh my goodness, you guys are worshiping the sun. Beltane 2019, fire, fertility, and festivities. Again, fire, fertility. So Beltane, Baal. Look at the pagan wheel. Ostara is the spring equinox. That's Easter. And then what comes right after it? Beltane. Okay, so what do they do in Beltane? They light fires and dress in white and then jump over them. Starting to see how this connects? Now you see where the Easter fire is? Easter is right touching Beltane. So they're mixing together what? Remember there was a horn god, but there was also a goddess? Well, Ostara's the goddess. Who's Bel? Well, who's Baal, you guys? Wasn't Baal the chief of demons? Wasn't Baal Mastema? Didn't Baal have horns on his head? We've looked at the pictures. Remember the pictures of Zeus? Zeus was also called Amun-Ra, Zeus Amun. So when basically the Romans and the Egyptian gods merged together, they made this like compound god, which was called Zeus or Zeus Amun. And Zeus Amun had those big horns that curled behind his head. As a matter of fact, if you watch my video called Moses Has Horns, I feature that in that video. So here you go. You can see God and goddess. Those 2 months are touching each other. And if you know how the pagan wheel works, the wheel goes around in a circle where it goes male, female, male, female, male, female. So you have so many male months or so many male sections and so many female sections. The zodiac's the same way. The zodiac houses go male, female, all the way around the wheel. Easter bunny comes early at the Vatican. Pope gives huge chocolate egg, or Pope given huge chocolate egg, donates it to jailed youths. So, okay, first off, if you knew what this chocolate egg meant, you'd be throwing it in the garbage. The Pope, being the representative of the Christian faith, should be aware that this goes back to something not at all Christian. The sad part is, now that we know what the chocolate part is about, it's a little bit disturbing. But what have we seen with the Jesuits? What have they been pushing in most recent years? This LGBT movement. Now it's starting to click, right? We have a brotherhood. We have priests and nuns that are separate. When I was in cadets, I was a member of the RCRs, the Royal Canadian Regiment. Well, look at this. I recognize that star. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I am wearing the wheel of paganism on my head. And then you can see the crown, right? And you're like, oh, that's the Tudor. I'm like, yeah, that's the Queen of Heaven's crown. The star behind is, remember the sun with the bursting rays? That's what you're looking at. And then, since you can tell it has 8 points, if you ever see anything with 8 points, you already know it's pointing back to the pagan wheel of the year. Why? It's the solstices and the equinox that gives you 4. But then what happens? Where do you get the other 4 from? The quarter Sabbaths. So in between, you had Sabbaths and quarter Sabbaths. So the witches, they have like big Sabbaths, which on the solstice and equinox, and then they have their like in-between Sabbaths. These are all called witches' Sabbaths. Each one of these is a witch's Sabbath. I mean, that's why the Wiccans declare that they're witches, and this is their symbol. We have fallen so far away from the truth. So now I'm going to show you the strange history of Easter and the Christian cross. I want to show you the book because I suggest you all buy it. It's like a couple bucks on Amazon, probably $2. Buy this on Amazon, have your own copy. This shows you quotes going all throughout history of different people who have researched Easter and what they've come up with. And it goes through things like the cross, the Easter bunny, some of the stuff we'll hear, but we'll take a look at a couple quotes here. So this is in De Temporum Ration, called The Reckoning of Time. So this is a priest. So this is actually an English monk who wrote the Christianity in England. So he lived between 673 to 735. He says, in olden times, the English people, for it did not seem fitting that I should speak of other nations, observance of the year, and yet be silent about my own nations, calculated their months according to the course of the moon. Hence, after the manner of the Greeks and the Romans, the months take their name from the moon. For the moon is called Mona, and the month Monaf. The first month, which the Latins call January, is Grilli. February is called Salmonoth. March, Herthmanoth. April, Ostramonoth. Ostramonoth has a name which is now translated Paschal month, and which was called after a goddess of theirs named Oster, and whose honor feasts were celebrated in that month. Now they designate the Paschal season by her name, calling the joys of the new rite by the time-honored name of old observance. Even John H. Newman, in his 1878 essay on the development of the Christian doctrine, wrote, the use of temples, and these dedicated to particular saints and ornamented on occasions with branches of trees, incense, lamps, and candles, votive offerings on recovery from illness, holy water, asylums, holy days, and seasons, use of calendars, processions, blessings on fields, sacerdotal vestments, the tonsure, the ring in marriage, turning to the east, images at a later date, perhaps the ecclesiastical chant, and the Kyrie are all of pagan origin. That's why we don't find this in the Bible. And sanctified by their adoption into the church. Okay, I get it. So in other words, I can do any pagan ritual that I want. All I have to do is adopt it into the Christian church. Really, because I got a really different message in the Old Testament. Must be a pretty loose new covenant that we're under with Christ. I don't recall it being that gentle. Orientation. Another residuum from sun worship led to building churches with the altar at the east, praying towards the east, burying the dead in reference to the east. We already saw this. We saw that ad orentium in Latin means to face the east, and that was supposed to be done in the Catholic Church during Christian prayer. Another piece of pagan demonology, so this is demonism now, was their ceremony of bowing and worshiping towards the east. For the pagans universally worshiped the sun as their supreme god. That's Baal. Even the more reformed of them, the new Platonists, Platonius, Porphyry, Julian the Apostate, as it appears by his oration to the sun. Notice it's called, whence it came to pass that the rising sun in the east, they usually worshipped in that way, as the Jews in Babylon usually worshipped west, because Jerusalem stood west thence. Hence also they built their temples and buried their dead towards the east. So Diogenes Laertius in the Life of Solon says that the Athenians buried their dead towards the east. That's the Greeks, right? The Athens. The head of their graves being made that way. And do not Antichrist and his sons follow this pagan ceremony and building their temples and high altars towards the east and bowing in that way to worship? Court of the Gentiles by Theophilus Gale, Part 3, Book 2, Chapter 2, Section 3, Paragraph 4. That's where that came from. How about Tertullian? What did Tertullian say? Tertullian seeks to avoid the charge of paganism while defending the practice. So Tertullian's one of the early church fathers, and they're doing this. So he has to come up with some kind of defense for what he's doing. Others with a greater regard to good manners must be confessed. Suppose that the sun is the God of the Christians, because it's a well-known fact that we pray towards the east, or because we make Sunday a day of festivity. What then? Do you do less than this? Do not among many with an affection of sometimes? I'm going to stop there for a second. Tertullian is confessing here that he thinks that what? God is the sun. So he's saying that, look, the rituals prove it. We face towards the east. We've made Sunday the day of festivity. Can't you see that the Son of God is the sun? Worshipping the heavenly bodies. Likewise, move your lips in the direction of the sunrise. Is it you, at all events, who have even admitted that the sun into the calendar of the week, and you have selected its day in preference to the preceding day? What is he talking about? He's talking about the Sabbath. Tertullian is actually admitting that they changed the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday, the day that we're meeting today, right? The real Sabbath. And why? Well, because you guys were worshiping heavenly bodies. It's associated to the sun. So again, worshiping the heavenly bodies, likewise, move your lips in the direction of the sunrise. It is you, at all events, who have even admitted the sun into the calendar of the week, and you have selected its day in preference of the preceding day as the most suitable in the week for either an entire abstinence from the bath, for its postponement until the evening, or for taking rest and for banqueting. Ooh, big words, Tertullian. Let's look at this one. For Ignatius Paschals, there is no authority reaching beyond the 16th century, but they must be a great deal older, if only for the contrast with midsummer fires, which could never penetrate into North Germany because the people held fast by their Easter fires. Now seeing that the fires of St. John, look, we're renaming it, we're Christianizing it. Now seeing that the fires of St. John, as we shall presently show, are more immediately connected with the Christian church than those of Easter, it is not unreasonable to trace these all the way back to the worship of the goddess Ostara, or Easter, who seems to have been more a Saxon and Anglican divinity than one revered all over Germany. Her name and her fires, which are likely to have come from the beginning of May, would, after the conversion of the Saxons, be shifted back to the Christian feast. Those mountain fires of the people are scarcely derivable from the taper lighted in the church the same day. It is true that Boniface calls it Ignis Paschalis, and such Easter lights are mentioned in the 16th century. Even now, in Hildesheim country, they light the lamp of Maundy Thursday, and on Easter day at an Easter fire which has been struck with a steel. The people flock to this fire, carrying oaken crosses, or simply cross sticks, which they set on fire and then preserve for a whole year. But the common folk distinguish between this fire and the wildfire produced by rubbing wood. Jagger speaks of consecration of fire logs, Teutonic mythology, Jacob Grimm, That's the Grimm brothers, the ones who wrote the fairy tales. 1883, volume 2, page 115. Midsummer fires. Midsummer was the central point of pagan festival in honor of the sun. So anytime you see people jumping over fire anywhere in the world, it's in honor of the sun, who had reached his greatest height from which he must soon decline. Catholic Christianity continued these festivals in St. John Baptist Day. Yeah, it was called the St. John Fires. Many of the peculiarities of the midsummer fires were similar to those of the Easter fires already noticed. Beltane or Baal fires. The Beltane or Baal fires and the ancient sacrifices to the sun god still continued in a modified form in Scotland. We're going to skim a little bit. Whoever draws the black bit is devoted person to be sacrificed to Baal, whose favor they mean to implore in rendering the year productive. The devoted person is compelled to leap 3 times over the flames. This is right out of the Bible. So in these days, we're not killing the person. We're not actually throwing them in the fire and burning them to death, but they used to. These days, what we do is we jump over it 3 times. Why do we jump over it 3 times? For the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. But God isn't a Trinity. The Trinity came from Egypt and Babylon. Read Psalms 82. The angels were also called Elohim, the celestial beings that live in the heavens. There's many of them. There's myriads upon myriads according to the Bible. That's thousands, myriads. So then how do you get 3? Here the reference to the worship of a deity is too plain to be mistaken. We see by the leaping over the flame that the main point was to select a human being to propitiate the god and make him merciful, that afterwards an animal sacrifice was substituted for him. And finally, nothing remained of the bodily immolation but a leap through the fire for man and beast. So in other words, we don't want to kill people anymore. That's a little bit taboo. So instead, we'll just kill an animal in its place. So how is this not talking about exactly what I read from Deuteronomy? These are the Easter fires, the Beltane fires, the Baal fires. Mariolatry. Mariolatry, we're talking Mary, right? The Queen of Heaven, Mother of Jesus, or are we talking Astarte? The worship of a mother goddess and her son formed a distinct feature in the paganism of Babylon, India, Egypt, Assyria, Greece, and Rome. Though variant in conception, the core of Mariolatry runs through all these pagan systems. Those who desire to follow in this theme in detail will do well to consult Alexander Hislop, The 2 Babylons. Here's an extract from page 82. The worship of the goddess mother with her child in the arms continued to be observed in Egypt till Christianity entered. If the gospel had come in power among the mass of people, the worship of the goddess queen would have been overthrown. With the generality, it came only in name. Instead, therefore, the Babylonian goddess being cast out, and in too many cases, her name was changed. She was called the Virgin Mary, and with her child was worshipped with the same idolatrous feeling by professing Christians as formerly by open and avowed pagans. Remember, the church is a business. Christ gave a Sermon on the Mount. That wasn't in a synagogue, and there was no church at that time. So the church was what? The word church in the Bible is ecclesia, like Ecclesiastes. Ecclesia is referring to the body of Christ. Well, what's the body of Christ? His believers. It's not a building. No building is going to bring you to God. If you haven't noticed, most of the people in the churches are the most confused of all. The Mass. The Mass, which has been for centuries the central item in the Roman Catholic worship, finds its origin in the unbloody sacrifices, which were offered to Phaphine Venus. That name comes up a lot. Venus. And to her counterpart in Babylonia and Assyria. It was this worship of the Queen of Heaven into which the apostate women of Judah were drawn, whom Jeremiah condemns for burning incense, pouring out drink offerings, and offering cakes to the Queen of Heaven. We read that. That's in Jeremiah. These cakes were marked with a phallic symbol of the cross. That's right. When you look at the cross, Christ died on the cross. He didn't walk around with a t-shirt with the cross on it. The cross is not a Christian symbol. It's a symbol of death. Christ overcame death the same way that we're going to. You don't go to heaven unless you resurrect. So Christ was the first fruits. He resurrects first, we resurrect afterwards. But that symbol of the cross is a phallic symbol that came from Phoenicia. And what's Phoenicia? The land of Canaan, the Canaanites. As before noted, they were the progenitors of the modern hot cross buns, which are associated with Friday, the day of Venus. So we can see we have still carried this tradition forward to Easter, because lots of people get their hot cross bun or cinnamon buns on when? Easter, Friday, Good Friday. The winter solstice was the date of the birth of Osiris, the son of Isis, the queen of heaven. Okay, so then Christmas, that's Osiris. Easter, that's Mama. So Isis, Egyptian queen of heaven. The term Yule, another name for Christmas, comes from the Chaldee and signifies Child's Day. The name for the festival was familiar to our Anglo-Saxon ancestors long before they knew anything of Christianity. So long before the Anglo-Saxons were brought into the fold of Christ, they were practicing Christmas for years. It was Yule or Chaldee or Child Day. The Hindus and the Chinese and Egyptians had a sacred egg, the history which can be traced from the Euphrates and the worship of Astarte. We learned that one today. Who's Astarte? Aphrodite, which is Venus. Lent. Lent has been given some appearance of having a Christian origin by the assumption, for which there is not a shadow of scriptural or even apostolic authority, that it is the counterpart of Christ's fast for 40 days. But the history of Lent shows unmistakable pagan origin. We already saw that. What was Lent really about? That was the victory over being able to kiss our idols again. The other guys were being all mean, and they started smashing our idols like they did in the Old Testament. But the church came forward and saved the day, and now we can have all of our statues and kiss them and touch them like they have powers. During that period of fasting, social joy and expressions of sexual regard were forbidden, because the goddess then mourned the loss of her consort. From this came the germ of Lent, and especially the practice of abstaining from marriage at that season. People wouldn't get married during the time of Lent, because what were we doing? We were weeping for Tammuz. Tammuz is Osiris. In the Bible, when you read about the women in Ezekiel weeping for Tammuz, this was during the time of Lent. The Christian boasts that the cross is a Christian symbol. We know it's not, when in fact, it is one, if not the oldest of symbols known to man. The cross symbolized the phallus, which is appendages and is known to have symbolized them for ages. The Egyptian used the tau or cross, and it is to be found on hundreds of monuments all over Egypt and India and other parts of the world, even among the American Indians. Davenport says, besides the lingam, so if you know Hinduism, you've got the Shiva and the lingam, the male and the female, the phallus and the vagina. Besides the lingam, the male symbol of the Indians, the phallus of the Greeks, and the priapus of the Romans, the cross, although generally thought to be exclusively emblematic of eternal life, has also, on account of its fancied similarity to the membrum virile, been considered by many of the typical reproductive powers of nature. This is a fertility cult. The cross is a symbol of a fertility cult. Christ died on the symbol of a fertility cult. It was known as such to the Indians, being as common in this country as Egypt or in Europe. The cross was just as much a sex symbol as it was the obelisk or the pyramid, both of which, according to all the authorities mentioned at the beginning of this essay, symbolize the human genitals. So in front of the Vatican, we've got this Egyptian obelisk because, of course, after the Passover, we got rid of the Egyptian gods, right? But then the church that took over put the phallus of the Egyptian god right where the Christmas tree is. Wonder what the Christmas tree is, another phallus? The church steeple is a phallic symbol. Remember, Christ didn't have a physical church. He wasn't in a he went to the synagogues and read, but when he spoke to all his believers, it was outside amongst the crowds of people. The church steeple is a phallic symbol, just as much as so is an obelisk. And the construction of the interior of the church, the anatomy of the female genitalia, was taken into accord. So when you look at the Catholic Church, the doors, and it's not just the Catholics, lots of churches have this, even the Protestants who didn't totally break away. If you notice the doors of that church, what does it look like? Well, it looks like the opening of a womb. Those doors are shaped like a womb, like at least the opening of the female. When one enters the church, he does so through a double door, labia majora. Then it is that he finds himself in a vestibule. To go further, he must pass through another double door, the labia minora. When he reaches the interior or auditorium of the church, he sees ahead of them the altar, the womb, and on each side of the altar may be observed the doors which lead into the rooms or tubes wherein the candidate for baptism comes into contact with the priest or preacher, and is there that he receives the seed of regeneration. He then comes back to the altar and is baptized, amniotic fluid, and leaves the church reborn soul. So when you go into the church, you get the baptism. Very different than what was going on with Christ. Where was Christ baptized? In the river Jordan. That's outside and that's moving water. In the church, you're walking through two doors that look like the opening of a woman. You go into her womb, and the baptism is actually signifying the amniotic fluid. That's a very different baptism. I'll read a couple more quotes, and I'm going to kind of close off here. If you want to read the rest of this book, I strongly suggest it, because any thoughts that you have about Easter, and Christmas is covered quite a bit in here too, they're going to be busted like a bubble, because you're going to see how many people have researched this in the past, and we're going back 1,000 years and have just proven this. Easter, though apparently a solar festival in its connection with the equinox, in reality, and even as ordered by the Christian church, belongs to the right of the moon. Of course it does. It's calculated by the moon. As early as the 2nd century, the Western church began to object the contemporaneous celebration of Easter with the Jewish Passover. We read about that. They said, we don't want to do what the Jews are doing. We want to do something different. We're Christians. And in 325 AD, in the Council of Nicaea, it was decided that it should be held in the future upon the first Sunday after the first full moon, upon or after the vernal equinox. And if it was a full moon fell on a Sunday, then Easter should be the Sunday after. That's what I was missing. Remember that one day we did the calculations and we're like, hey, how come we can't get the right date for Easter here that one year? That's the piece we were missing. And if the full moon fell on a Sunday, then the Easter would be the Sunday after. That's where the miscalculation came in. Easter is derived from the name of the Saxon goddess Ostara, whose festival was held in April, and who is undoubtedly identical with Astarte, the Phoenician goddess of the moon. Now, the moon was the earliest measure of time, and we are told by Max Muller in his first lecture on the science of language that her Sanskrit name, Mas, is clearly derived from the root ma, to measure. So wait a minute, the Catholic Mass, Mas. Who's Mas? It's the moon goddess. It's Astarte. The moon was masculine in Sanskrit as she was in Anglo-Saxon. Androgynous? And indeed, in all Teutonic languages, and as she is in German still. This confusion of sex, as it seems to us, who are accustomed to think of her as a goddess excellently bright, probably arose from the fact that the deities of the earliest mythologies were androgynous, and that sex was a question of relation and depended upon their personification in an active or a passive form. So if it was active, that'd be the man, right? That's the aggressive. If it's passive, that's the female, the receiver. Even in Greek mythology, we find frequent instances of this double aspect. Dionysus or Bacchus, for example, being worshipped both as a male and a female. Just so you know, that's Tammuz. That's the book of Ezekiel. The moon, as the measurer or the lord of time, was considered an active element and personified as masculine. Why the moon should have been chosen as the measure of our days rather than the sun is clearly explained in the Secret Doctrine. So now we're starting to look into the New Age movement, because Madame Blavatsky wrote the book, The Secret Doctrine. So all these children during the 60s and 70s and the flower power movement, it was that influence. It says, in outline, this explanation is as follows. When the earliest races of mankind wished to mark off periods of time, some cycle that belonged equally to the starry spheres and to humanity would naturally be that upon which their choice would fall. Such a cycle was found in the physiological phenomena connected with the life of the mother and her child. The lunar month of 28 days, or 4 weeks, 7 days each, gave 13 periods in 364 days. So the solar year is 365 days, but for those of you who've read the book of Jubilees, God didn't say there was 365 days in a year. God said there was 364. 364 divided by 7 is 52. 365 divided by 7, you get a decimal. That's why you have the Gregorian calendar and you have the Julian calendar. Since the Julian calendar wasn't calculated in 364 days, it's always going to be off. Give it another 1,000 years if we live that long. They'll have to readjust today's calendar again, because 7 does not divide equally into 365. The old Egyptians and Hebrews both calculated the calendar by 364 or 365 days of the lunar year. Thus came the method of measure by lunar time and through the lunar of solar time. The moon, as we have already seen, varied in sex according to the circumstances, as the new moon with her brilliant horns and increasing strength, or as the full moon In the plenitude of her power, she represented the active element and was personified as masculine. She was the Lord of light, the sign of new light. Now notice this, she's called the Lord of light. So we have a Lord in the Bible, and in the book of Hosea, what does the Lord say? Don't call me Lord. In other words, don't call me Bali, call me Ishi. What does Ishi mean? It's Hebrew, it means husband. Don't call me the Lord, call me your husband. What does that mean? Christ in the New Testament was the Lord, was he not? Didn't he say, I am the bridegroom? Wouldn't that be your husband? So when you call the Lord by the name Lord, and the pagans have lords, Adonai meant Lord, Adonai came from Adonis. As a matter of fact, you can look at the spelling, it's the same. So we've got multiple lords in the East here. How do you know when your children are confused because all of a sudden there's a religion integrating with their religion? How do they know which Lord to worship anymore? Well, if they listen in the book of Hosea and they chose the name husband, there was no one in the ancient world that was calling their God husband. Look, it's a female, right? But the waning moon was passive or feminine and typified darkness, death, and in the Egyptian mythology, typhoon or the evil principle, who had the supremacy during his 14 days of rule when he tore Osiris, the sun, into 14 pieces. So look at this. We're being lied to. We're being given a lunar solar goddess. We're being given this for Easter. And the moon was associated to what? The evil principle. And so Osiris was cut into 14 pieces. Why? What happens if we take 28 and divide it in half? You get 14. So that means when the moon is waxing, that's 14 days. When the moon is waning, that's 14 days. So 14 days of male, 14 days of female, 14 days of active, 14 days of receptive. The moon is male and female, depending on whether it's waxing or waning. But with the new moon, Osiris came back to life. And at its full, the Egyptians sacrificed a black pig, representing now conquered typhoon to Osiris. Why do you think you have a pig for Easter? In the planisphere of Dedra, the god Kunsi is offering the pig by the legs in the disk of the full moon. And in some parts of England, the leg of pig is still eaten on Easter Monday, a curious survival of the sacrifice. In ancient symbolism again, the light half of the moon was masculine, the dark half was feminine. So when the moon is waxing, that's the three men. And they said, that's the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. No, not unless you think that the moon is God. The Trinity is coming from the moon. Can you see it now? And then when the moon would go dark, that's the female. That's the triple pagan neo-goddess. So when you see the three women, the three witches in front of the cauldron, that's the moon waning. When you see the three men with the triangles over their head, which is not Christ, that's the moon waxing. There was another dualism connected with the moon as the prototype of the Virgin Mother, which may explain a very singular Old English Easter custom, which has always been a mystery to the antiquarians. The Virgin Mother was represented by the British Druids as two, the sisters Curie, Lou, the British Proserpine and Ceres. Ceres is where you get the word cereal. So you know that Ceres was what? She must have been a vegetation god. But what do we see with vegetation gods? Fertility, it's agriculture, right? And the Virgin and Mother. Now I'm going to stop with this book. You can read this on your own. It is packed with all kinds of information explaining where exactly these customs and rituals come from, because they are not in the Bible. And we've already read in Deuteronomy, you cannot add to the Bible. If the Bible says, God says, do this on the holy day, you cannot do that. You cannot add this extra garbage. You have to remove it. Otherwise, you're not a Christian. You're caught in Babylon. And we're going to see what happens. What happens to the people that won't separate from these ideas that identify as Christians? It says in the Bible. So remember, Deuteronomy 12 and 30. Take care that you not be ensnared to follow them after they have been destroyed before you. Who are we talking about? In Exodus, what were they leaving from? Well, they were leaving from Egypt because the firstborn children had died. The Jews had now conquered the gods of Egypt through their Lord. He showed his power through the judgments he put on Egypt. And that you do not inquire about their gods, saying, how do these nations serve their gods? That I may also do the same. You shall not worship the Lord your God in that way. For every abominable thing that the Lord hates, that's pretty strong language. Every abominable thing that the Lord hates, they have done for their gods. For they even burned their sons and daughters in the fire of the gods. We read it, we saw it. That's Beltane. Everything that I command you, you shall be careful to do. You shall not add or take from it. Keep the Passover. It's not Easter. Don't mix it with Easter. These are two different ideas. One is pagan, one is Christian. Let's take a look at Revelation 18, and we'll end it there, because we have to see what's the outcome. What if I don't care? What if I'm like, screw you, I'm just going to do what I'm doing, and I don't care what the Lord says? I don't think that's a good idea, because when I read this, I finally understood what this was really about. Let's look at Revelation 18. Babylon is falling. After this, I saw another angel descending from heaven with great authority, and the earth was illuminated by his glory. And he cried out in a mighty voice, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a lair for demons and a haunt for every unclean spirit." Listen to this one. Every unclean bird. Remember that the Easter bunny, he was a bird first and a bunny later? And every detestable beast. All the nations, some of the nations? No, all of the nations, every nation in the world, all the nations have drunk the wine of the passion of her immorality. Remember, Babylon was what? A fertility goddess. So the passion, what are we talking about? The passion of Christ? No, we're talking about some kind of weird sexual rituals. These nations have got drunk on the wrong ideas. When we talk about wine in the Bible, a lot of you know this, but if you don't, wine in the Bible is associated to false doctrine. So when we see the nations became drunk on the wine, what it says is the nations have drunk false theology. You guys are not reading the Bible. You're not doing what Christ said. You've mixed in all this stuff from the East and you think it's perfectly fine. The kings of the earth were immoral with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown wealthy from the extravagance of her luxury. So in other words, the merchants, they're making money based off what? All this religious crap that has nothing to do with the Bible. You wonder why these are just like Hallmark holidays where you're just buying a bunch of junk? Here's your answer. They are making money. Remember, the moon is associated to mammon, and mammon is associated to money. And of course, when people are worshiping a moon goddess, moon god, there's money involved. Here's the important part. Here's why you should be concerned. Then I heard another voice from heaven say, "Come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins," here it is, "or contract any of her plagues." What happened in Egypt? Did people get a plague? How did the first child die? Well, the angel of death came, the destroyer angel. That's right. And the firstborn died because of a plague. And so here we see the people in the future, they're warned by the angel. And the angel says, "Come out of her, my people." What's Babylon? Well, Babylon has something to do with a fertility goddess. And Babylon is some kind of a church, and it's the mother of all these other pagan churches. And so the angel says, "Come out of her." You don't want to share in her sins, because what's going to happen? When God places his judgment on Babylon and the followers, whether you're naive or whether you know what you're doing, what's going to happen? You're going to contract the plague.
Jesus saith unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father, but by me. No man cometh unto the Father, but by me.
For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of the dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Brothers and sisters, the sword is coming. Put on the full armor of God, so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. that at the name of Jesus, every knee shall bow.